Good evening. This is the Tuesday, December 14th, 2021 regular meeting of the Flemington Borough Planning Board. This virtual meeting is called pursuant to the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act. Both adequate and electronic notice of this virtual meeting has been provided by way of publication in the Courier News newspaper on or about August 6th, 2021. In addition, notice of the meeting was posted on the door of the Borough of Flemington Municipal Building located at 38 Park Avenue, and any handicap accessible entrances there too, posted on the municipal website, provided to the municipal clerk, and distributed to all persons, if any, requesting copies of the same. This meeting is being recorded with both audio and video and may be rebroadcast. This meeting is a judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues that are relevant to what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and decorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. I'll ask everyone please to rise as you are able for the flag salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and
justice for all.
Can you please call the roll?
Mayor Driver,
Here.
Mr. Long,
Here.
Mr. Campion,
Here.
Mr. Dashna,
Here.
Mrs. Engelhardt,
Here.
Mr. Cook,
Here.
Mr. Budney,
Here.
Mr. Hain,
Here.
Ms. Giffen,
Here.
Mr. Hill,
Jim's here. I see him.
Yep.
He's waving.
he's waving his hand. Mr. Norton,
Here.
Mr. Levitt,
Here.
Ms. Weitzman,
Here.
Ms. Kaczynski.
Here.
Mr. Clerico,
Here.
Ms. McManus,
Here.
Mr. Troutman is excused. I believe we have someone from his office, Mr. Kennel.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, full house for our last meeting of the calendar year. Excellent. Let's get started. Item one, as always, is a period for public comments for items not currently being heard in front of the board on this evening's agenda. Eileen, did we get anything for public comment by email or on the voicemail line?
No, we did not.
I will say I did receive earlier today correspondence from Go Hunterdon, from the president and executive director of the county's transportation agency. It was sent to me as chair of the planning board, and I believe copied to members of council, having to do with the Liberty Village redevelopment plan. I don't need to necessarily read it into the record because there's nothing in front of us in terms of the planning board of what's in there. The council has it. And Eileen, if you weren't copied on that email, I'll make sure I will forward it to the members of the board as a point of information, just so that you know that I got a copy of that. But that was having to do with their comments on the redevelopment plan, which quite honestly belonged in front of this stuff goes to council more than us, but that's okay. So, but they were all copied on it as well. Are there members of the public who wish to speak during our public comment time on the agenda? Please indicate by clicking on raise hand on the Zoom interface, or *9 if you're on the phone. Okay, seeing none. Mayor comments.
I have none, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Council comments.
Yeah, hi. The only thing I had tonight is just to let everybody know that last night the council did approve the ordinance to adopt the Liberty Village redevelopment plan. And that was all for me tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Long. All right. HPC, I do not see the chair of HPC in the audience, nor did we get anything this week. When I say this week, because we met last week from HPC. Item 5 on the agenda are the minutes from our last meeting. I want to thank Eileen for getting them done quickly. I know it was a short window between meetings. Can I get a motion in a second on the minutes?
So move, Hain.
Can I get a second?
Budney, second.
Thank you. Needs to be someone who is here. Thank you. For those who are here at the meeting, any corrections or clarifications on the minutes?
Yes, Jeff, I just wanted to have added under my comment towards the end where I had asked about the building exhaust, having an exhaust fan. It was also had mentioned about their air conditioners being on the rear of the building, that they will be making 0 noise. I just want that in the record.
Right, so this is on page 5 of 6, Eileen, about halfway on the page. Mr. Rain asked if there was an exhaust fan in the building to direct fumes and how snow melt runoff from the solar panels was handled. Mr. Ingham discussed that there would be a delayed peak time for this runoff. Also in that, we need to add, there was a question for Mr. Hain about noise from the air conditioning units mounted on the back of the rear building. And the testimony was given that they would not be a noise. It would not be too noisy for the neighbors, I believe was how they put it.
Very
Correct.
good. I will add that to the minutes.
Right. Are there other additions or corrections for the minutes? Okay, seeing nothing, do I get, can I get Eileen, can you call the roll to approve the minutes as amended with this one correction for Mr. Hain?
Certainly. Mr. Hain,
Yes.
Mr. Budney,
Yes.
Mayor Driver,
Yes.
Mr. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Campion,
Yes.
Mr. Dashna,
Yes.
Mrs. Engelhardt,
Abstain.
Mr. Cook,
Abstain.
Ms. Giffen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Item 6 on the agenda is adoption of the resolution memorializing the decision of the board for the Enzo Padovani application at 30 Allen Street, Block 16, Lot 1. What's the resolution number on this, Eileen?
This is 2021-20.
-20. Okay.
And Eileen, do you have, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, do you have that application number handy too? I couldn't seem to find it on any of the documents.
Yes, it's 2021-02.
Great, thank you. I'll make those amendments and send it back.
Thanks. So this is just the resolution memorializing the decision of the board. Those who can vote on this are the ones who participated in the discussion for that application. Kara, is there anything else you want to add here?
Nope, not unless anybody has any questions.
Can I get a motion and a second on adopting the resolution?
Driver will move.
Second, Giffen.
She beat you, Mark. All right. Any further discussion? Kathleen, can you call the roll, please?
Mayor Driver,
Yes.
Ms. Giffen,
Yes.
Mr. Dashna,
Yes.
Mrs. Engelhardt,
Yes.
Mr. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Budney,
Yes.
Mr. Cook,
Abstain.
Mr. Hain,
Yes.
Mr. Norton.
Yes.
Okay. So if we could, so Kara's just going to add those two, the application number and the resolution number to it. And then Eileen, if you just forward that along to me, your first chance, and I'll get that signed as well so that we can get that off and taken care of before the end of the year. That'd be great.
Yeah, and Kara, if you could add the motion second and the vote as well.
Yep, I wrote those down. I'll add those when I add in the application and resolution numbers.
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all. Item 7 on the agenda is going to require a little bit of introduction and conversation regarding approval regarding an amendment to the resolution memorializing the approval for Premier Outdoor Media, Block 49, Lot 2. Kara, can you please explain what we're doing here to everybody?
Okay, so everybody should have received a request from the applicant to remove condition number 11 from the resolution. And there was a very lengthy description as to what that condition entails. There was also reference to condition number 19 of the resolution, which addresses a similar issue. Condition 11 addresses the removal of the stockpile on the property, which the applicant agreed to do. By way of that condition, the applicant also agreed to work with the adjacent property owner to remove the remainder of the stockpile, in essence, to expose and provide access for the borough to the underlying sewer line that was beneath this stockpile. Condition 19 of the resolution also discusses the stockpile and discusses that the applicant shall provide the borough with an easement over the area above the sewer line so that they would have access and be able to do whatever it is that was necessary. So in essence, there's a similarity between these two conditions. In any event, you'll see from the letter from the applicant and also from Bob Clerico's letter in response that there was a site meeting, and based upon their review of the condition of the stockpile, and I'll let them speak to it as well or answer any questions you may have, there is essentially an impossibility for removing just the portion that the applicant agreed to do. It could create a safety problem, and the adjacent property owner did not want to agree to remove the stockpile on their portion of the property for whatever reason. Of course, the applicant can't force them to. So in essence, for those reasons, the applicant has requested that condition 11 be removed from the resolution. Mr. Clerico reviewed the letter, provided his input and conclusions with regard to that condition, and has concluded that he doesn't see any reason why the board cannot vote to remove that condition from the resolution. Now, that's the practical standpoint. That's the implementation of the condition. From a legal perspective, the board has the ability to amend or remove a condition of approval. The question is procedurally how that gets done. For conditions that are deemed to be significant, which means essentially from case law that it would be a condition that would have altered your determination with regard to the application. So if we have a condition that the applicant is looking to amend or remove, and that condition is substantial, meaning that it would change any board member's determination, then that has to be done by way of notice and a public hearing in the same manner that the original application was done. If that condition is not deemed to be significant, then the board can vote to amend, remove the condition as necessary without public notice and a public hearing. So what you have before you, as I said, is the request, Bob's response. They're both here, obviously, so you can ask them any questions. But what I would like the board to do is for everyone that participated in the hearing, not just the people that voted for the application, but everyone that participated in that hearing to listen to the information. And I would like to ask everyone whether or not any change in that condition would have affected their ability or would have affected their decision on the application. And then we go from there based upon the decisions of the board members.
I know that sounds like a long way around, but that's what we're going to do, and in order to make sure that we're following the letter strictly of the law here. So, Bob, is there anything you want to add? You've got your note here. Is there anything that you need to add to what Kara laid out?
No, just one clarification, Kara. Condition 19 on a dedication of the easement doesn't mention the stockpile, at least the way I read it.
No, it doesn't mention it. My understanding of the reason why that was inputted was to provide access to the sewer line, which is covered in part by the stockpile.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I tried to make my letter as self-explanatory as I could. If anybody has any questions, I could address them. But
All right, so let's do that. Does anybody have any questions for Bob on his note, or and he could also speak to what was outlined in Jeffrey Hall's letter that you all got a copy of as well.
And Jeff's here as well. Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I see him there, but I don't, if someone's got a question for him, I'll let him talk. I didn't know if we necessarily needed to do that just yet.
We don't, just want everyone to know that he is here as well, if anyone has any questions.
So Kara, I just want to understand, we're basically saying if this provision was not in the original resolution, would it have changed our vote at all? That's what
Correct.
we're saying? Okay,
Correct.
I just want to understand that.
Yep.
All right.
You're absolutely right. And,
Thank you.
everyone needs to make that determination. And if there is someone that looks at this condition as being, as affecting its determination, then we will proceed and have a notice public hearing on this condition issue.
So does anyone, does anyone have any questions for Bob or for Kara?
I guess my only question for Bob is, for future applications, they're gonna run into the same problem, but from the other side, no?
It's in Raritan Township.
Right, so I'm
No,
just,
actually, I believe that the whole pile is in the borough, I believe. I have to pull them out here.
Yeah, I don't think so, because there was reference in the condition that the applicant must remove the portion of the stockpile on the applicant's property and would work with the adjacent property owner to see if they could remove their stockpile as well. It seems to me like it was kind of contemplated that one portion of it would affect the other, which is kind of why we put that in there.
I thought the other side was on, actually, I thought the other side was on the shops of Flemington, but what you're
Yeah, I
saying
think
is
it
that
is.
it's.
No, you know, you're right.
So it is
I
in the
misspoke.
borough.
I
It is in
misspoke.
the borough.
I
Okay,
misspoke.
okay, so I guess that's it.
One question, quick question I had, I guess, for Bob. So reading through the letter, so does the, I was a little confused here. If say the stockpile remains, remove the condition that the stockpile remains, does the borough still get the sewer easement?
Yeah, that's what, that's condition 19. The
Oh,
applicant says they're
okay,
working
all right.
toward that. My comment was that the stockpile, and it really, it's a borough, it's not really a planning board decision, more so it's a borough, public works decision.
Right.
And Mike's on if Mike wants to speak to anything, but my understanding is that the borough doesn't have any issue with leaving the pile there for the time being. It's not doing any harm to the sewer line. And as I indicated from the planning board's perspective, we got rid of condition 11. We still have condition 19, which says they have to get an easement from the borough. At some point in time, should the borough decide they need some conditions associated with the stockpile in the dedication of the easement, they could do it there.
And understand
Okay.
that, and the way that it's written, Brian, is that they have to negotiate with the borough, not with the planning board for that dedication of that easement. That
Okay.
Borough.
Yeah, very good. I just wanted to just confirm that the easement still moves through, because that I remember that was part of the discussion that would have affected my decision probably.
No, that's
So, okay, so it stays. That's why I wanted to verify.
19 stays.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so Kara, do you have a list of the people who we need to poll, and can you call them off one by one?
Absolutely. So just so it's clear what I'm asking right now is I'm going through every person that participated, yay or nay, in this application as to whether or not removal of this condition would have affected their determination. So Jeff,
This would not have affected my determination.
Susan,
No, this would not have affected my determination or vote,
Ryan?
whatever you want to call it.
This would not have affected my determination or vote.
Mark,
Would not have affected my decision or vote.
Karen,
This would not have affected my determination or vote.
Jim,
He's giving a thumbs down of visually. He's got audio issues. Can we accept that?
so yes,
He's
Jim,
giving-
let me ask you this, Jim, thumbs up if this would not have affected your determination. There we go. I see a thumbs up for the record. And Trent,
This would not have affected my determination.
okay. Okay, so based upon that, Now, the members of the board that voted for this application, reason being that we're voting to essentially amend the resolution. So only those that voted in favor of the resolution can now vote to amend the resolution. I
So
have
I'm- Yep, right. So what we need right now, excuse me.
is a
is
motion and a second.
I need a motion. Do we have to do two votes, amend the agenda and then right? So I need a
Correct.
motion to amend the agenda to include what will be resolution 21-21, right, Eileen? That's our next number.
Correct. And I just want to point out one error that I have on the agenda. It says that the resolution was 2021-12, where it is actually 2021-14, where we are doing the amendment.
Right.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Thank you. So I'm looking for a motion and a second to amend the agenda to include resolution 2021-21, which is a resolution memorializing the removal of condition 11 from resolution 2021-14 with regard to application 2020-01. Can I get a motion and a second to amend the agenda?
So move, Haynes.
Second, Budney.
Thank you. Can I get a roll call vote to amend the agenda to include this?
And who do to amend the agenda? Is this the entire board, or is this
Full board.
for board? Okay, thank you. Mr. Haynes,
Yes.
Mr. Budney,
Yes.
Mayor Driver,
Can I vote to amend on that since I was recused from?
Yeah, we're just amending the agenda. so
Okay,
you can-
yes.
you can vote.
Okay, yes.
Mr. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Campion,
Yes.
Mr. Dashna,
Yes.
Mrs. Engelhardt,
Yes.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
Ms. Giffen,
Yes.
and that's it. Okay.
Okay, so the agenda has been amended. Sorry, it's December. We are now going to consider this resolution memorializing the removal of condition 11 from the prior approval. The only folks who are eligible to vote on this are those who voted in favor of the original approval, correct, Kara?
Correct.
Okay, so is there any further, like, does this need to get moved and seconded, I guess? The
Yeah, we
resolution?
got to move and second the resolution. Yep. And if you need me to call
Can
out.
you remind us who's eligible to participate in this particular vote?
Jeff, Brian, Mark, Jim, and Trent.
Thank you. So can one of y'all move and somebody else second the resolution?
So move, Haynes.
Jim's given a
Second.
thumbs up for a second, I think. Okay.
Jim,
Alright.
yeah, Jim can, yep.
Yep, Jim's, okay, so
Yep.
is there further discussion on the resolution to remove condition 11? Okay, seeing none, can we call the roll? Eileen, you're muted if you're, it's okay.
Yeah. Mr. Haynes,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
He's
Giving
given a
a thumbs
thumbs up. Yeah,
Mr. Dashna,
yes.
Mr. Budney,
Yes.
Mr. Levitt.
Yes.
Thank you.
I want to thank you all. I know this was a little bit of gymnastics, but thank you. So I see Mr. Hall, just so you're in the audience, I think we can say that this has been satisfied. We will get the resolution that was just voted on, removing condition 11. We'll get that signed and out to you as quickly as we can. I know that part of you moving forward on this application is satisfying this condition. So we will take care of that as quick as we can, certainly by the end of the year, without a problem. Okay.
I
Go ahead,
just,
Eileen.
I was just want to confirm that I was going to provide the publication for both of those resolutions that we adopted tonight.
Yes. And Eileen, I'll fill in the blanks and send those over to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay. We are up to item 8 on the agenda. Mike Campion, a member of our board, class 2 member, municipal employee, director of public works for the Borough of Flemington, asked that we, he wanted just to make sure that we were aware of ordinances that were adopted by council earlier in the year, specifically about fees and escrow for water and sewer reviews. So Mike, what did you want us to talk about, or what did you want us to be sure of what was going on?
Thank you, Jeff. When a site plan comes in, we spend considerable amount of time, water and sewer, going over from Form A to the actual plans. So we asked council to add a schedule fee by ordinance so we can charge the applicant against their escrow to review these plans.
Okay. So is this now, Eileen, part of our checklist? Like this gets taken care of when there's applications, that we know that these fees get paid and that there's escrow posted, or no?
I have never seen an invoice actually from the water or sewer department for review at this to this point. Mike, do you know the mechanism or who would produce those invoices so that we can then charge?
We can go through Rebecca Newman on the invoices, but the schedule fee is set by ordinance.
So Eileen, so there's two things in my mind. One is when an application comes through that's going to require water and sewer review, just make sure that those fees that are in the ordinance get rolled into the escrow estimate that we provide an applicant so they know we post adequate escrow. Given the scale and scope of engineering and planning, it's not a huge amount of money on top of it, but just make sure that it's part of your
I can certainly provide the ordinance with the fees to the applicant.
Yeah.
We might have to review that since it's new to make each applicant aware of, and depending on the scale.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. And make sure that if we could, going forward for any new applications, make sure that on the website where we've got, where someone can download the forms for site plan and all the rest of that stuff. I just want to make sure that those fees are posted in a way that everyone knows as well.
Just a question procedurally, would the water and sewer departments set up their own escrow, or would this be coming out of the planning board escrow? You know that question, Mike?
No, I don't.
I know we have different escrow set up for inspections that once an application is through compliance for construction and inspections.
Mr. Chair, I'm looking through it right now. I think we're talking about section 11-4.3. It talks about Form A reviews for small and large projects. It has a fee that's in there. Is that the right one, Mike?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I could take a look and see if we need to make any notation on our application documentation, just saying, referring back to these sections, or if anything else needs to, be referenced on ours, and just to make sure that that's collected. The only thing I think we would need to know is which form they're reviewing. If we don't typically see the application for that, but let me take a closer look at this. I'll talk to Mark and see if there's anything we need to reference on our application.
Okay. All right. We want to make sure that our employees who are doing time on these reviews, that we make sure that gets taken care of. So, okay. Was there anything else, Mike?
No, thank you.
All right, good, good. All right, we'll make sure that that gets taken care of. And again, let's target any new applications that come in after the first of the year. Let's hope we can have that in place by then. We don't have anything we know that's coming down the road, so I think we're okay. If it's not January 1st, if we can, but if we can kind of get that done by, into January, that'd probably be a good idea. Good. All right. Any other questions there? All right. Thank you all. We are up to item 9 on the agenda, which is the continuation of the public hearing for Lee Roth, 91 Main Street, Block 21, Lot 25, continued from November 23rd and December 7th. I'm going to promote Mr. Roth, and then we can proceed. And while Mr. Roth and Mr. Shotland and Mr. Ingram and Mr. Stearns are getting up to the panel, I will give everyone a second there. Okay, so where we were in terms of the hearing, according to my notes, we had heard testimony from Mr. Shotland, the architect, from Mr. Ingram, the engineer, and we had paused before the planner got started with his testimony. Mr. Roth, before we dive into the planner, I understand that there might be some additional testimony from the engineer and the architect. Would you like to handle that first, or do you want the planner to testify?
No, I think we'd have the planner proceed with what we'd planned, because the testimony that might be provided by the engineer and the architect are not really new. They're in response to questions or things raised by board members.
Okay, so Kara, we had sworn everybody in, correct?
Yes, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Mr. Stearns was here at the last meeting and we have sworn him in.
Yes.
Okay, so we please proceed.
Tom, would you state, I know you've obviously testified a number of times before this board and all over the place, but would you, for the record in this particular hearing, state your credentials, including your background, your licensing, your specialties?
Thanks, Lee. I'm a licensed professional planner. I'm AICP. My license is current and valid. I've been practicing for 30 years or so. I've testified before the zoning board. I've testified before numerous planning boards and boards of adjustments in central New Jersey and throughout the state.
And you've testified in front of the planning board and been accepted as an expert in that regard on an earlier version of an application relating to this property and in relation to other properties in the borough. Is that correct?
Well, I've testified, I think, before the zoning board. I don't believe I've testified before the planning board before.
Okay, I'm going to ask Beth, any objections to qualifying as an expert planner?
No.
Okay, so without objection, please proceed.
You've prepared and filed a report with the board that they have put on their website and as part of their record. What was the date of that report?
September 30, 2021.
And that is the most recent report that you've provided to the board?
I believe so.
And would you be good enough to comment on the application, summarize the application as you see it as a planner, and then give us a fairly brief or quick summary of your report when this is a board that I'm sure has all taken the time to read your report. But
right. Well, I really wasn't going to go into the report. I was really going to focus on the proofs, since pretty much everybody's reviewed it. I mean, certainly if there's questions, I'll answer any questions on the report, but I really just want to go through primarily focus on the proofs of, all the variances. I've reviewed Beth's memo. I think she's done a good job summarizing all the points of fact. I've looked at all the professional memos. I've reviewed the plans. I've visited the site. Doug Shotland, the architect, and Wayne Ingram, the engineer, they've given you a good overview of the project. Again, I'll focus on the proofs. I think the goal of this application is allowing small businesses and landowners in the DB zone to improve their property. This is a creative solution to improve the property, a creative solution that requires some variances for an appropriately scaled, adapted reuse development. Just one thing I wanted to touch on, the fire marshal issued a revised letter after his meeting with Gary Shotland, I guess the end of last week on Friday, or was it Wednesday? That letter modified his position, and we're happy to answer any questions on that. But I mean, the gist of it, he kind of made 3 points. He said that the sprinkler system is going to enhance the safety of the building and hopefully in the event of a fire, contain the fire to a small manageable incident as it is intended to do. Right now, neither structure of the property currently has a fire suppression system. He also wants to mark the drive as a fire lane. And also he wanted a fire department connection location on the front of the building. I think those were his 3 key points. Anyway, on to the variances.
Tom, real quickly, before you continue, let's mark that. That is the fire marshal's letter dated December 9, 2021, and we will mark that as PB 8.
Okay.
Thank you. And we agree to the 2 things that Tom has outlined that were requested, the marking in the driveway, etc. Go ahead, Tom.
Great. Okay, there's five proofs we have to show for the C2 variances. One, that it relates to a specific piece of property. 2, that the purposes of the MLU would be advanced by a deviation of the zoning requirement. 3, that the variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good. And 4, that the benefits of the deviation would substantially outweigh any detriment. And 5, that the variance will not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the zone plan or zoning ordinance. So just to summarize the variances, I think the applicant's proposal satisfies the criteria for the grant of the C2 variances. We have 6 variances. I'll just list them here. We have a garage, which because we have more than 3 spaces, we need a variance for that. Front yard, I'm going to talk about that, but we really don't need that. I'm going to go through my analysis of that, of why we don't need it. Rear yard, which is a pre-existing condition, number of parking spaces, impervious coverage ratio, and stormwater management, best management practices, which is a variance that Bob Clerico identified. So let me touch on the garage first. The parking under the rear building is, I guess that's considered to be a garage. Apparently was not with the Spice Factory building on Church Street. But anyway, we're requesting a variance from section 1201 that would require, per the definitions, a building for the storage of not more than 3 motor vehicles with no provision for repairing, servicing, storing such vehicles for profit. We have more than 3 vehicles. We have 8 that are proposed to be parked there. There's no intention of repairing, servicing, or storing such vehicles for profit. And I just wanted to mention, my understanding is that there is a proposed ordinance not yet introduced in the borough that would eliminate this variance, which makes sense to me. And I guess you folks probably know about that more than I do. But we need this variance to get more parking on the site. It's really the only way that we can do it without another parking contraption, like in the last application. This is a reasonable working solution that'll satisfy the residents' parking demand. Garage parking on site is viewed as an amenity by the tenants. Wayne Ingram testified that stacked tandem parking is generally accepted. We commonly see it in townhouses and developments throughout New Jersey. And again, stacked parking is really no different than in a conventional single family or townhouse where you have a car parked in the garage and a car parked in front of the garage in the driveway. You have to move the car in the driveway to get your car out of the garage. Also, I wanted to touch on one point. No one has to back down the driveway. There's plenty of room to turn around and drive out head on without having to back down the driveway. There's 32 feet from the back of the surface spaces to the face of the rear garage, and the drive area is 45 feet long. You have more room there than you have in the aisle and the shop right. You have here 8 more feet in the drive aisle than you do at the shop right. So I think there's plenty of room. I mean, you may have to make a 3-point turn, but there's plenty of room to get turned around and head out face first. And the other point, the garage is going to have a fire suppression system. Okay, front yard setback. Okay, per section 2620E, minimum front yard, 25 feet required, 12.5 feet is existing. It's not changed. It's a pre-existing non-conformity with affecting the front building on the lot. It's also a C1 hardship. There's really no way to remedy this. Our building front yard is generally in alignment with the other adjacent buildings on the street. And the 2015 reexamination report says the minimum front yard setback should be changed from a maximum of 25 feet to a minimum of approximately 0 feet and a maximum of approximately 10 feet. That's page 33. So we're consistent with the master plan. And then there's a footnote on the zoning schedule for the DB zone. And this will lead me into my analysis. It says the front yard depth may be reduced to the average of the setbacks from the street line of existing buildings on both sides of the proposed building. In the event an adjacent lot is vacant, the average shall be calculated using the required setback for the vacant lot. So, we really don't need this variance based on my analysis. The 91 Main front building is approximately 2 feet behind the building to the south, which is 95 Main Street. And the building is roughly even with the building to the north, which is 79 Main Street. Roughly scaling off a 10 scale survey, 79 Main has an average 12.85 foot setback, and 95 Main is roughly around the same. They're both parallel to the right-of-way line. The 91 Main front building is not square to the right-of-way line. It's slightly askew. So our front yard setback is 12.5 feet on the north and approximately 15 feet on the south, which gives us an average of 13.92 feet. So we're set back further on the average than the other buildings at 12.85. So we're set back roughly about a foot more than the neighbors on average. So we comply. On this analysis, I would suggest that we don't need the variance. So now we're down to 5 variances, not 6. Any questions? Thank you. Rear yard setback. So we request a C2 variance from section 2620, minimum rear yard, 50 feet required, 0.73 feet existing, and 0.73 feet proposed. Again, this is a pre-existing nonconformity. At ground level, the building wall will remain as it exists. At the upper levels, the building will shift in 3 feet, increasing our setback at that level. Again, this is to meet the fire codes with the windows facing adjacent buildings. This is also a C1 hardship, and Doug Schottland addressed this in his testimony previously. Okay, parking number. So C2 variance requested from section 2629D, parking. All other housing unit parking space requirements other than single family shall comply with the requirements of the residential site improvement standards per RSIS. 17 parking spaces are required, and that's rounding up from, I think it was 16.2, and 11 are proposed. Plus, we get 1 space credit for our EV spaces, which gives us 12 proposed. So we're short 5 in the, the ordinance arithmetic. So in the evening, assuming shared parking, so in the evening, when we're only satisfying residential, we comply with 12 spaces for 6 units. RSIS for those residential units are 11.8. And our parking demand is less if all office use it remains as is currently. So shared parking, those 3 surface spots can serve as a dual use for the office during the daytime working hours and residential parking at night. This seems to be accepted by every other project that you see in the borough. That would functionally reduce the office deficit from 5 to 2, and those 2 can park on the street or a county lot. There's a possibility in the future that commercial space could become retail or restaurant, assuming the market changes, which now has no parking requirement in the borough. That was changed recently. So if we had retail or restaurant in there, we wouldn't have any parking requirement. When you look at the effective parking demand that I outlined in my tables in my report in pages 18 and 19 of my report for overnight parking, that analysis suggests that we wouldn't be short any spaces. We compared the effective parking at 122 Main, which is a comparable project, to 91 Main Street. I think this is a reasonable compromise versus, doing some kind of a parking structure like we were considering before. And repeat from my planning report on page 20, the overnight borough parking situation. Most streets are generally open for overnight parking by residents, except for permit parking areas. This is from the Flemington Police Department. No overnight parking along Main Street and East Main Street. Borough parking lots are available for overnight parking. If prohibited, it's not enforced by the Flemington Borough Police Department. County parking lots are available for overnight parking. Flemington Borough Police Department does not enforce county lots. A county will report any abandoned vehicles to them, however. According to counsel for Hunterdon County, the county parking lots are currently available for overnight parking. There is no enforcement by the county. The county has no issues with overnight parking. So my conclusion is there's plenty of nearby parking available areas for overnight parking in both the borough and county parking lots, as well as public on-street parking, both day and night. Again, if you're in some of the recent articles, the mayor and other officials have been quoted as saying there's lots of parking in recently published articles. Okay, impervious coverage. So we're requesting a variance from section 2620E, maximum impervious surface ratio. 0.75 is required. 0.9531 is existing and 0.9455 is provided. So we're reducing it ever so slightly by like almost 57 square feet from the existing, but it can't be reduced to the point of compliance. And I'm going to discuss this kind of more in the next variance since they're related. This is with the stormwater management. So we need a variance from section 2637, impervious coverage. The impervious coverage limits for all commercial and multifamily developments which disturb 2,000 square feet or more, or propose to increase impervious cover by 200 square feet or more, shall be subject to stormwater management, best management practices per chapter 21-4. Bob Clerico mentioned this in his memo. Wayne has addressed this a lot in his testimony at the last hearing. this is really such a small de minimis area. It's 1,465 square feet over the required impervious, 0.75 versus 0.94. I mean, it's really a 38 foot by 38 square foot area. You know, we've reduced the impervious slightly from the existing. Wayne has testified that his proposed drainage improvements will yield much better stormwater management plan than meeting the letter of the ordinance. And again, I think the overall thing here, the board is here to bring their common sense to this process. This is a typical issue for most lots that along Main Street. And I hope that you would see the merits of the variance request, since it's a very small area that's involved. Okay, so let me go into I've summarized the variances. Let's go into the proofs. So this relates to a specific piece of property. It's the 91 Main Street site, block 21, lot 25, roughly 7,500 square feet. Again, while the site is in many ways typical of small lots in the Flemington DB zone, I think the site is very unique. The site is unique and not like the lots next door or across the street. There's two separate buildings on a small lot, less than a quarter acre. There's really only one other condition I found further north on Main Street that actually had two buildings on it. The site is particularly suited for this adaptive reuse and is an appropriately scaled development. We can eliminate existing conditions in an adaptive reuse. We can't eliminate existing conditions in adaptive reuse. The buildings front and back are creating an enclosed courtyard. It's an ideal downtown location for apartments, walking distance to all of downtown, prime location in downtown. There's no rental apartments exist on the property. They are permitted use and we are under the height requirement. The property is currently in an all office building, all vacant except for Lee's office. The last tenant moved out this month. The site is unsuitable for office or retail given the current market conditions. If it was a larger site or located somewhere else in the borough, we probably would not be doing this plan like this. So I would say it's very unique to this particular site. Okay, item 2, purposes of the MLUL would be advanced by a deviation of the zoning requirement. Okay, so this meets the following purposes of zoning, and I'm just going to give you the letter. I'm not going to go into detail. So paragraph E of the purposes of zoning to promote the establishment of appropriate population densities, etc. This provides a mixed-use property that strengthens the borough and is appropriately scaled development. The apartments and parking are a consistent land use with the surrounding properties and is a compatible land use. There's no negative effects on the surrounding properties. One block in each direction, north and south, we find apartments over the pizza shop, the jewelry store at 123 Main, and even ground floor apartments along Main Street between William Street and Mine Street and some further south of that intersection. The Flemington Community Partnerships Planning Redevelopment Consultant, who's in the middle of a large study in the partnership with the borough, recently recommended 1,000 units to be absorbed over 8 to 10 years. We're providing 6 units, less than 1% of that projected demand. The green benefits are being provided in our application that the master plan suggests. Both buildings are planned to be net zero on energy. Solar plant panels on the roof of the rear building and electrical vehicle chargers are being installed, not just stubbing up the conduit, but we're actually installing the actual chargers. All right, paragraph G of the purposes of zoning to provide sufficient space and appropriate locations for a variety of land uses. These deviations, most of which are pre-existing conditions, all but the parking garage, allow us to provide a balanced plan that provides a mixed-use property. The immediate neighbor properties on Main Street are mixed use and used for retail, office, and residence, and a church use at 79 Main, so we're compatible. Paragraph I of the purposes of zoning to promote a desirable visual environment through creative development techniques. This is a unique and creative design solution for an adaptive reuse to maintain the density and provide parking on a tight site, provides more on-site parking, numerous green benefits as mentioned above. Excuse me, the front building maintains its historic character with minimal facade changes, and the streetscape will remain. The rear building will get 1 story added. Both buildings remain below the allowed height. Paragraph J of the purposes of zoning to promote the conservation of historic sites and districts. This reinforces the core borough area that is the historic district in downtown Flemington as a designated center as part of the state plan that has infrastructure and sewer and water. It maintains the existing historic structure and character of the Flemington streetscape, will help maintain the downtown historic district. It won't detract from it. There's no zoning detriment. All neutral colors appropriate for the historic district are proposed. The front building color scheme stays similar to what it is. Paragraph N, to promote utilization of renewable energy resources. Again, we have solar panels, electrical vehicle charging stations, and both buildings designed to be net zero energy. So additionally, there's estimated to be 48,000 square feet of vacant space in the downtown area, vacant office, retail space. This proposal will absorb some of that vacant space and get additional residents and foot traffic to downtown. The 2015 Terra Nobile Design Strategic Plan and Vision Report filed with the municipality advocates residential development in the downtown walking area. This will help strengthen the downtown historic district and add more foot traffic. The proposed buildings feature many green features as advocated in the 2010 master plan. And Doug mentioned these previously in his presentation, so I'm not going to go through and list all those. Again, the proposed building features many green features, which I've mentioned previously. You know, I won't repeat all those. One thing I want to mention, solar panels are not visible from the public streets. Just add that in there. Again, the 2015 reexamination report encourages promoting green features and energy efficiency. Making the numbers work requires higher density. The project meets many of the 2011 sustainability elements, goals, and objectives. I won't list all those objectives. Again, Doug's mentioned those previously in his presentation. The 2015 master plan report includes the following borough-wide goals, which are relevant to the application. Again, all from the re-examination report. And Doug mentioned most of these, I believe, so I'm not going to repeat them. The 2015 examination report includes the following historic preservation goals from the 2010 historic preservation element, which are relevant to the application. Again, that's encourage preservation and adaptive reuse and contribute to the improvement of the economy of Flemington by encouraging expenditures for the restoration and adaptive reuse of historic buildings for local purposes and encourage and promote tourism. Okay, so prong 3, that the variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good. The detriment must be substantial. If there is any detriment found here, it's not substantial in my opinion. The applicant is 5 spaces short based on total required parking, 17 minus 12 with the EV space thrown in there. Based on shared parking, the applicant would only be one space, but based on the anticipated effective parking demand, we will have enough parking. So the parking will be increased from the current 4 spaces to 11 spaces, 275% increase. A residential use is a less intense parking use than the office or retail. Office use will require 22 spaces of parking at 3.5 per thousand versus the 17 spaces for the proposed residential and commercial mix. Should the commercial space become retail or restaurant in the future, this parking requirement for the space is 0 per the ordinance. Again, and that's to encourage retail and restaurant in the borough. The majority of the uses in the DB zone along Main Street do not meet the parking requirements. There's adequate on-street parking both day and night, and parking in the nearby county and borough parking lots for overnight parking by tenants. The applicant is the building owner and has made important contributions to the renovation of the downtown area with no negative impact to on the community. The plan demonstrates having rental apartment is a far better zoning alternative than having vacant office space. There's no negative property value effects. There's no impacts on 95 Main or 79 Main and neighbors to the north and south. The apartments are permitted in compatible land use. Again, the solar panels are not visible from the public streets. With a full building, the applicant continued to operate, manage its property in the same inconspicuous manner in which it operates it today. Yes, in essence, there's really no effect, no less a substantial negative effect on the surrounding properties or damage to the character of the neighborhood. Prong 4, that the benefits of the deviation would substantially outweigh any detriment. No properties fronting on Main Street, at least if developed to their highest and best use in the borough and the DB district, comply with the parking ordinance. Less parking demand than previously required. Plenty of available parking spaces on nearby streets and county and municipal lots. We do not see any detriments, no less any substantial detriments. And prong 5, that the variance will not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the zone plan or the zoning ordinance. Again, we meet the intent of the zone plan per the DB ordinance, which is to provide mixed uses in the downtown. This plan provides that. You know, we're providing office on the ground floor of the front building, which I think this board wanted to see, and that could possibly be retail or restaurant in the future at some point. The property will become a mixed-use property that supports the DB zone purpose. This is a 7,500 square foot property, 0.17 acres, approximately less than 1% of the entire DB zone. Our plan is not blocking the uses in the underlying zone. The borough still has ability to do all those other uses in the zone district. Our plan won't limit the ability of other landowners from using their property as zoned. I don't see any impairment. So my conclusion. So the applicant is pleased to present this proposal for an adaptive reuse and appropriately scaled project that will help strengthen the downtown. The proposal is a superior and preferable alternative to having a building full of vacant office space. For all the reasons set forth in this report, the proposal qualifies for the requested C2 variance relief. And I just want to mention some things. I think the point and purpose of C variances is to look at a site and not feel handcuffed by minor technical issues in the ordinance. And you have said in your master plan that this is what you want, a lot of the things we're proposing. So there are some technical requirements that need relief. The MLUL allows granting of these variances. There's no substantial damage. Improving the town generally by allowing some flexibility and allowing the impervious, which is slightly improved, and the pre-existing setbacks. If you don't allow these variances, you can't allow anything to happen in the borough. This is a less dense use of the property by letting us do the residential. You can grant these variances because they should be granted and no negative effects on the neighbors or the community. We're improving the safety of the site and have a better situation with sprinkled buildings than we have now. The buildings aren't sprinkled now. We're providing other benefits. We have an electric snow melt system and all the green benefits. We reduced the intensity of the overall use. And we've reserved space on the first floor for future retail or restaurant. So this application satisfies the criteria of the MLUL for the grant of the C2 variances. Therefore, the planning board is authorized to and should approve the requested relief. We request that the board approve the site plan and grant all the variances together to allow this project to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Chairman, Tom is available for any questions you and your board members have.
Thank you. We're going to start with our professionals as we usually do. So Beth, do you have questions for the applicant's planner?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a couple questions to get a little better handle on the parking testimony.
Sure.
Let's see. You had indicated that overnight parking is permitted on most streets, and that the county is available for overnight parking. And that's what I wanted to explore a little bit more. So can you, so two questions really. So one, I wanted to know, what is the closest location that is available for overnight parking? And by available, I mean, not just literally physically there, but also legally permissible for overnight parking. Because one of the things I'd like for you to explore, I guess the second part of my question is, I think you said that the county parking lots can be parked in overnight, but I'm not sure that it's legal to do so for the parking overnight. And so maybe it was a question of enforcement. I just wanted you to review that and explore that a little bit more.
I'm looking at my report here, Beth. Bear with me a minute.
Take your time.
I was looking for, I thought I had an exhibit in here. No, I'm not seeing it. Yeah, wait a minute. Oh, here it is. So you asked me a slew of questions. So first question was where's the closest parking spot, I think?
Yeah, for overnight, not just any parking, but just overnight parking.
Well, the county lot would probably be the closest. You can't park on Main Street overnight.
Which county lot is that? Is that the one on Main?
I'm sorry?
Street? Which county lot is that? Is that one on?
The
Main
one
Street?
right around the corner. I forget it's just right below 95 Main. Just south of 95 Main. It's right next, it's adjacent to it.
Okay.
The other closest spot would probably be, I'm not sure if there's some parking on Court Street and Park Avenue, and over on Spring Street. I mean, these are all there, Maple, Spring Street, there's possibly Mine Street. But I think there's ample areas within a block.
Are you are you certain that so you're looking at the parking for the county parking lot? You said the one adjacent to 95 Main. So it's your testimony that overnight parking is permitted or not enforced on that site? Because I thought I heard a distinction between that.
Where'd my notes go? Okay. Again, this came from Shana Taylor, Hunterdon County Council, confirmed that county parking lots are currently available for overnight parking. There is no enforcement by the county. The county has no issues with overnight parking. So that's from the attorney at the county.
And I'm sorry, Tom, this is Carrie. That's referenced in your report?
Yes,
where's
that's on page 20 of my report.
Are we allowed to enter that into consideration like that?
Well, it is a part of what we've marked as Exhibit A1. That was submitted with the application. So it's part and parcel of the application documents that this board has and this board can consider as part of its determination on the application. So certainly you could also ask questions with regard to it. Same way we're looking at site plans.
I mean, let's say parking isn't allowed, in the county lot overnight. I mean, there's plenty of other off-street parking around on the borough streets. So, I mean, I don't think, this is not the only place to park. There's plenty of alternatives to overnight parking.
Also,
And
in
again,
that
I think my
respect,
effective parking demand shows that, we're probably going to be okay based on the comparison to 123 Main Street.
Also, additionally, just to comment, on page 22 of Tom's report, he shows a Flemington parking diagram. And you can see that we are quite close to Court Street, and in nearby is Lot 1, which is a county lot. It also shows 3 other public parking lots. And in the course of discussion relating to whether or not the borough would end up owning parking lot 1, or whether they were making an effort to get that for the benefit of the downtown business, we have heard both the county and other people say there's plenty of parking within a reasonable distance of parking lot 1, and it might not even be needed. We're not talking about needing a lot of spaces. The people at the building to the north of us have no parking. So they park out in the street on Court Street. They park wherever they can find parking spaces. For the couple of spaces we might need, we'd have the same thing. But I think that it's probably even best controlled by the market. If people don't find that they can park, if we can't provide them with parking spaces, they'll rent somewhere where they're going to get parking. But that's not likely to be then in the borough, because other projects that have been approved have less of a ratio of parking available on site than is being offered with this project.
Lee, let's just be careful with what we're putting into the record here. We do have a report from Tom that has information in it, and it's been submitted as part of the application. We all know that board hearings do not follow strict evidentiary rules of courts, but I'd like to refrain from saying we've heard some people from the county saying, I mean, let's at least try to have some sort of backup documentation, something written as in Tom's report for us to be relying on. So I'd like to just refrain from putting that kind of information in the record.
Well, in response to that, Tom's report with his exhibit 10 on page 22 shows 4 parking lots. And I can tell you that I participated on a Zoom borough meeting, and I heard the mayor herself say that people walk further in parking to get parking at malls and other such places than they would walk from the intersection area of parking lot 1 to parking lot, 3, the big one.
Okay, so let's just refrain let's just refrain
It-
from hearsay comments in general. Okay, that's really, I don't want to muddy the record for either
That's
your sake or ours.
that's a specific one, and hearsay is allowed in an administrative hearing of this type. It's something that the board is required to evaluate. Is it likely or not? But it's not prohibited or restricted as it would be if it was a court proceeding. So when you ask, is there some place to park? We're talking about most of the parking is going to be on site. But if there is some overflow or a few more spaces needed, there are plenty of places in the area, which you can see right in the exhibit 10 on page 22.
Okay, I want to move on. Beth, did you have another question for?
I just wanted to, yes. Just in terms of the parking consideration. So for one, I'm going to defer to the borough's traffic engineer on the calculation of parking demand and whether that's accurate, just for the record, so that the board has that information, but knows it's not going to come from me. But in terms of evaluating the parking variance, I do think it's important that the board consider whether or not this site provides an adequate amount of parking. And yes, waiver relief or variance relief should be considered, just like we would for any request. But I think it's important that the borough consider these site-specific reasons why parking relief can or cannot be supported for this property. And yes, it should be recognized that there may be other properties within the downtown or the borough as a whole that are non-compliant in their parking, but that is not part of the planning, the criteria for meeting variances. And also that fact should be considered in terms of not only about this particular site and whether the parking may be adequate, but really it should also be considered about the impact on surrounding properties. So I just want to put that type of information in context. The lack of parking for other properties in the surrounding area may be real and accurate, but the importance of that is whether or not the borough may be reaching a tipping point with inadequate parking along Main Street. I think that's the consideration. So with that, I do actually, and I'm sorry, I have one more question. And part of the reason why I had asked about whether or not county parking lots are indeed permitted to provide, or rather permit overnight parking. And that is because Exhibit 9 in the report, which is labeled overnight parking lots proximate to the site. And that includes the Court Street parking lot that is behind the courthouse. And when I look at that site, I actually see a sign that says no overnight parking. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to explore what is the closest parking space or parking area that would be available for overnight parking, because while I don't see that type of signage for the county parking lot along Main Street that approximate to 95 Main Street, I do in fact see that for the Court Street lot behind the courthouse. So I guess my question is, Tom, is there new information that's come to light about the county eliminating a provision that prohibits overnight parking behind the Court Street lot, as I'll refer to it? And are you aware of any other prohibitions on other county lots that are listed on this map, overnight parking?
Short answer, I don't know. I mean, I haven't gotten anything new. I mean, this is the information I got previously. You know, what I told you is what I know, and I don't have, I'm trying to remember. I did drive around and look at all the lights, look at all the lot parking lots. I looked at the signage, and I'd have to go back and look at my photos. I don't remember now. I'm trying to remember the big lot down by the courthouse. I don't think there was anything that prohibited overnight parking. But anyway.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Beth. Since we're in the vicinity of parking, I just want to make sure, Scott, was there anything else that Jay already talked to the engineer? Was there anything here that you wanted to follow up on that you think would be beneficial for the board?
The only thing I like, and good evening, again, Scott Kennel with McDonough and Ray. Do I have to be sworn in? I don't.
Yeah, we should probably do that.
Scott, raise your right hand. You swear the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know, it's important to recognize in the residential site improvement standards, they provide a provision for this similar situation, especially in a CBD area or downtown area, where a board can consider alternate parking practices. You know, Tom talked about the shared parking, but even if we're just strictly dealing with residential and we're dealing with basically a shortage of one space for the residential uses, there is a provision for a de minimis exception that's permitted by RSIS, and for the board to grant to this if they feel it's the testimony has been adequate. So I just want to put that out there for the board's benefit. And the other item that you know, I had discussed with Jay was the prior fire memo that has been updated, and they've agreed to comply with the recommendations of the Fire Bureau. But other than that, I don't have anything else to add to the testimony that's been provided.
I appreciate that. Thanks. Bob, do you have questions for the planner?
Just one. Your just to confirm, your testimony on impervious coverage and stormwater management, you're relying on the testimony that was issued to date by Wayne Ingram and the documentation filed to date in support of that, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, questions from members of the board? I'm sorry, Kara, go ahead.
I'm sorry, yeah, just one quick follow-up to what Bob was asking. Tom, I'm sure I got this wrong, but I just want to clarify the record. Going back to that impervious coverage ratio, what I heard from you was that there's 0.75 required, 0.931 existing, and 0.9455 proposed. But then I heard you saying that there was a small decrease. So did I get those numbers wrong, or can you just reiterate that for me?
Yeah, hang on, sorry.
That's okay. I just want to clear up the record. If
Sure, let me find where I am here. Okay. Yeah, and I thought I got these off of Wayne's plan. Maybe I made a mistake. I thought it was 0.9531 is existing. 0.9455 is provided.
Yep.
And 0.75 is required.
That's fine. You know what? I think I missed the 5. I had 0.931, so I think it should be 0.9531. So that's
Yeah.
fine. Thank you for clearing that up for the record for me.
Sure.
And on the same topic, Tom, the stormwater provisions either require the site to be at 55% impervious coverage or to provide the listed, we'll refer to as green infrastructure stormwater components. And in this particular application, there's no proposal for those components of the stormwater system. Ergo, you're looking for relief under that standard as well, which again would otherwise specify 55% as the alternative coverage, correct?
I thought it was 0.75 was the impervious coverage required in the ordinance.
It's 0.75, but as long as you can, if you're meeting the other standards, the 2,000 square foot of disturbance or 200 square feet of additional impervious surface, those provisions kick in. When they kick in, you either have to do on-site stormwater management, or as an alternative, you can reduce down to 20% less than the minimum, the maximum allowed.
Oh, okay.
I think we should have Wayne direct any questions about stormwater.
Yeah, I'll probably just get myself in trouble if I talk about it too much.
I was just speaking to the variance issue, that's all.
Yeah, this was, I think we're just trying to clarify the numbers so that we get the variance, the record correct on what variance relief is being requested, that's all. This isn't the technical stuff because I think Wayne already testified to that. All right, so we'll go to questions from members of the board. Well, I'm going to jump in because I got one. And I don't, you mentioned in your testimony about what you call prong 3, but that the relief can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good.
Yeah.
One of the things that Mr. Ingram testified to was the connection to utilities and how that would impact the could possibly impact the existing streetscape improvements that were done. The plans as submitted route those under the driveway to connect to, the existing driveway under Main. There was testimony given that they would look to tunnel under. That's prohibited by borough ordinance. And then we kind of left it there. So I'd like for you as a planner, if you could please talk about how that we can, that this proposed site plan with the routing of utilities as such is not a substantial detriment to the public good if it could potentially cost the borough $1 million, whatever it is, if we mess up the streetscape improvements by digging it up. Like there's a huge concern that we've been dancing around here, that the proposed utility connections we don't seem to have a way to do that without impacting the streetscape, which could which would put the borough at a substantial financial risk, in addition to the streetscape cohesive of the business district. So if you could just give us some planning testimony there, I'd appreciate it.
Explain this financial risk that the borough faces. I guess I don't understand that quite totally. Could you explain that to me?
There are other people here on the board who could explain it better than
I
me.
mean, we're basically cutting, we're doing a cut, we're cutting for a utility trench. So you cut out 10 square feet of sidewalk, you go back and repave it, the applicant pays for that. How, I guess I don't understand how that's a financial risk to the borough.
So I don't know if Mike Campion could talk about it, or the mayor knows about this, or Councilman Long knows about, maybe doesn't know about this as much detail. Like there's that we were told explicitly, the terms of the grant was that you cannot touch it for a period of time without losing all of the money that we got, the $1 million or whatever it is that we got. Like you can't put a cut in the curb. You can't disturb the improvement.
Well, I would suggest that that's a stupid ordinance, to be quite frank. I mean, nobody on the whole, how can anybody in Main Street do anything? You can't cut the sidewalk and you can't jack and bore under it. So how can anybody ever repair any utilities? Anybody else on Main Street, up or down, it comes in with an application. You might as well just say, you hand in the application, say, forget it, we can't do it. We can't do anything on Main Street because, we signed this thing for the grant monies. I mean, it makes totally no rational sense to me whatsoever.
Jeff, if we
I
may-
I would like to. at least-
Hold on,
like to
can I
at
get
least-
Mike, can you jump in and explain the terms, please? Since we have
when we accepted the grant money to do the streetscape, there is a moratorium there, except for health, welfare, and safety. If somebody has a water main break, yes, the sidewalk can be ripped up. This is not health, safety, and welfare.
Well, I would beg to disagree with that. Here's an applicant that's trying to improve his property. That goes to the public health, safety, and welfare. So I would say that
An improvement is not health, safety, and welfare.
Who says? Where's the definition?
I do not want
You have a definition on that?
I do not want to risk not being reimbursed. We're still not fully reimbursed on this project.
Well, I understand that.
Mr. Chairman, we were told earlier that hearsay was not appropriate. I don't see how this whole questioning area of the planner or anybody else is anything other than hearsay.
I've got the director of public works. I got the director of public works who's intimately aware with and he's providing direct testimony, Mr. Roth. This is not hearsay. This is the horse's mouth. So it's not hearsay. This is real. And we never got to this issue on the prior application, and we're going to get to it now. Your proposed plan does not provide for adequate connection to utilities that does not disturb the streetscape. The borough would be out the money for reimbursement, and no one has given us a straight answer. And if this is the answer that your planner is giving, that's fine. And the board will consider this as we deliberate whether to move forward. So I'm going to move on, and other folks with questions. I saw Susan had a hand up, right?
I did, Jeff, but my question is actually for Scott. So I'm assuming.
Well, yeah, we'll do that after. Yeah, we'll do that later.
That's all I've got.
Mayor, go ahead.
Can I just jump in and ask Mr. Campion, how long is that moratorium for? Because it's not that different like when we get NJDOT money, I don't think, is it, where if they give us money, then once that money is spent and that work's done, there's a moratorium for how many years is it?
It would be 5 years. However, since we have not been reimbursed yet, I do not know when the starting point is.
Okay, so let's leave that as that, and then we'll take the rest of this, as we go. Other members of the board with questions for the applicant's planner.
Jeff, if I could just real quick,
Yeah.
Mike, can we see you on your screen? I'd just kind of like to swear you in if I can, just so that we can take that testimony that you've provided for the board. And if you can't, there we go.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Mike. Just raise your right hand quickly for me. You swear the testimony you just gave to the board was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Perfect, thanks, Mike.
Thank you. All right, other questions for the planner by members of our board?
So I have a question, I'm sorry.
Ed Mayor.
Yeah, so I asked a question last week and I don't know, maybe it should go back to Wayne, but he didn't answer it last week when I answered it, so maybe it's a planning question. On the electrical chargers, and you cite that as with the new land use law at the state level, allowing for adjustment of parking requirements.
Yes,
With the installation of electric car chargers.
yes.
How many of the spots, you're putting in 3, how many of the other spots are in made ready status?
What's a made ready
I think,
status?
well, made ready, I think means you're just stubbing up cable, conduit and wire so
Yeah.
you can install one in the future. Don't hold me to this, but I think we're putting in 3, and maybe Doug can confirm that when he testifies. But I think we're putting in 3. But there's also the issue, if you stub up, there's some that you can have a pedestal and there's 2 chargers mounted on one pedestal. And I guess I'm not sure if we're doing dual pedestals or dual chargers on one pedestal. I'm going to say, I think we're putting in 3.
I think there was, if I could, it looked like that there was material submitted by the applicant in response to that question last week. And when we bring back in Mr. Shotland or Mr. Ingram, one of them, I'm sure we'll be able to answer that for you, Mayor, because I think
But
that
we
was,
are required 15% for residential, multifamily residential, which I think worked out to be 3 chargers, I think.
I thought the law also though addressed the made ready status that I'm bringing up to get those waivers as well. I could be incorrect. I'd have to go back and read it. It's been a week or week and a half since I read it, so.
Well, yeah, we're actually putting in the full chargers by that new ordinance. You only really have to have them be make ready. So you're stubbing up conduit and wire. But we're actually putting in the chargers. So we're going one step further than what the ordinance requires.
Thank you.
any other questions from members of the board for the planner? Okay, it's opportunity for members of the public who may have questions for the applicant's planner on the testimony given this evening. Please click on raise hand, or if you're on the phone, it's *9. Okay, not seeing anybody with a question from members of the public. Thank you, Mr. Stearns, for your testimony this evening. Mr. Roth, do you have any additional witnesses, or are you going to bring back Mr. Shotland or Mr. Ingram?
No, we're back to Mr. Ingram at this point.
Okay.
Hello.
Wayne, you've already been sworn in. I think there was some additional information you wanted to provide in response to questions that had been raised, et cetera. If you would do that, please.
Sure. And I guess I'll again try my best to answer the EV charging question. So my understanding is that the requirement, the new law requires that 15% of parking spaces be made make ready, which again just means that the electrical connections and any concrete base pads and things of that nature would be installed. On our site, that equates to a need for, I would say essentially, 1 to 2, depending on fractions. And that 1/3 of that have it installed. So in essence, we're only required to have one station installed. We're proposing 2 stations, one of which is going to have the ability to service 2 locations. So as I read it, you know,
I
we're
thought it
far in
was
excess
3,
of what
Wayne.
would be required.
I thought it was 3.
Thank you,
3
Wayne.
months.
I appreciate that.
So again, we're in excess of that, but because of the way this thing is worded, we can only really take credit to reduce our requirement per se by 1 stall. We were also asked, I guess, some more questions regarding trash management. Just wanted to confirm that so the sizing of what we proposed was for the 95-gallon wheeled totes that are common within the borough. Our anticipated use is to need approximately 2 totes per week for the residential component. So we will exceed that. So just trying to give ourselves a factor of safety, potentially needing 2 to 2.5 totes of the recycling every 2 weeks. And again, we have an excess of that proposed in the property. And, you know, we came into that determination based upon our expected need for the apartments and using, you know, other development as a baseline to establish those number. Again, confirming that the commercial will be dealt with through the private trash hauler. And I guess, you know, the other main question was with regard to our stormwater. We did prepare an additional narrative, which, you know, was not submitted in time for the borough to review. I believe a copy of that was provided to Mr. Clerico, though I would certainly understand if he hasn't had a chance to review that. But again, our conclusion is that, you know, there is no increase in either volume really, or in terms of in both flows and volume for the site would go down ever so slightly with this proposal through the increase in the pervious surface proposed. I think as we stated last time, I don't think we're anticipating that the drain that we're proposing from the roof leaders to the street could handle all storms. In fact, you know, it's only going to really be large enough for, you know, the smaller storms, but also those are the most common. So, you know, the standard everyday storm is going to be able to be handled. Larger storms, the 10-year, 25-year, 100-year, there may be an overflow. That overflow would go back to the kind of an emergency overflow at the buildings where the roof leaders come down. And that excess water would flow through the parking lot out to the street in the same fashion that currently takes place today. So again, we don't believe that we can, you know, really accommodate a detention system as was suggested last time based upon the relief on the property. We just don't have enough pitch to really provide anything of any substance in a detention system, because when you factor in what kind of cover you're going to need over it to make whatever surface you have, whether it's a building slab or the parking lot, yeah, and then you have to have adequate pitch to get that thing to drain to the street, it just quite simply doesn't exist. So we kind of did look at all those options and really believe that, you know, the fact that we're trying to give the best plan possible in terms of the layout and the site, and also reduce the impervious, that, you know, while the ordinance is well intentioned, this particular site does not lend itself to it being strictly applied. And I guess the last point, just to clarify that we again would agree to work with the landscape, I'm sorry, the board planner regarding our planting beds. I think the applicant had stated that they'd like to do some planted bulbs to create some color in that small area. Again, given its limited size, that would kind of be the preference to put in there. But again, we can work with the planner to make any changes to that request. And I think that's all I recall that was left outstanding for my part.
Wayne, let me ask you to address these last questions that arose about how do you fix or install or put in the sprinkler system pipes, or the things that are called for by this project in view of the road foreman having said that there may be some provision or restriction to prevent that.
I mean, I don't think Mr. Campion is misstating the way that that grant was written, there's a moratorium, it ends in a certain period of time. The only other, again, we discussed last time, two solutions exist. One was, cutting open the area, and the second was boring. Now, doing any kind of boring would not, in my opinion, violate that, because we wouldn't be disturbing the actual improvement. That would be more of an issue of violating the borough, ordinance as to how that could be accomplished. And, again, that may be an easier route, with less risk that could, the borough could entertain. But, I do agree that, these are really the only two solutions that do exist, not just for this lot, but for any lot that would make improvements, within the limits of the streetscape. So, it would just seem, good planning here would be to create some mechanism for anyone to, address this problem and not have to wait for years to do it. But, what the preferred method of the borough is, we would defer to, to the officials on that one.
So from an engineering viewpoint, installing these utilities or other things that are needed, any approval would, from your viewpoint, be conditioned on your and the developer's ability to work out a way to get it accomplished. It doesn't necessarily prevent any approval.
I don't think it prevents an approval. It just has to be, in agreement with whatever the borough officials would permit. It's really a means and methods more than, what is proposed for the site.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from our board's professionals on the additional testimony given by Mr. Ingram? Bob, do you have anything to follow up on?
No, just to say that there was some revised calculations submitted yesterday. I had a very brief opportunity just to thumb through it, but I'm not in a position to offer any comments back on it.
Okay. Beth, do you have any follow on for Mr. Ingram?
No, I don't.
Okay. And Scott, you're good, right? Nothing.
I'm good. I have nothing.
All right. Any members of the board with questions for Mr. Ingram on the testimony given just this evening? I think he answered the EV question that the mayor had. Was there anything else? Yeah, Susan, go ahead.
I just wanted to know, Wayne, what is your interpretation of the ordinance when you you suggested that that there were two methods to solve this problem that we talked about at the last application and this application. Do you believe that boring, for example, violates the ordinance? Are you familiar enough with, I mean, I know you had to familiarize yourself with the ordinances in order to do your design.
Well, they're two different things, I guess. So the borough's ordinance, which prohibits the boring, I think again, my understanding is that's not the same as what we're talking about in terms of the prohibition on the streetscape. So, those are kind of mutually exclusive things. So, if you were to ask me, I would say it's probably easier to obtain, and less risky for the borough to grant an exception in this case to allow the boring. We're talking, I can understand why such an ordinance would exist in the first place. The only thing I could say is that, here we're talking about, we're not talking about a, 1,000-foot bore. We're talking about like a 4 to 6 foot bore, under a very limited area of the streetscape for the purposes solely of preventing, the damage to that, which is a lot less riskier and less likely to cause any of the problems that you would associate with boring, than in all other instances. But, whether or not, I haven't studied the intricacies of your grant application to know, what leeway may exist beyond what Mr. Campion already, testified to.
So if you were, let's just say the grant issue didn't exist, the ordinance against the boring, basically you would have to ask for a variance for that. I mean, well, not a variance, an exception to that ordinance in order to get this design accomplished.
Correct. You know,
Correct.
we're either looking at waiting for a moratorium to end, which could be years, or I think you've probably correctly labeled that. It's an exception. It's probably not in the zoning section of the ordinance. So it would really just
Yeah.
be an exception from that provision. Correct.
Okay, so you would be looking for an exception from that ordinance requirement in order to accomplish this design.
That's correct.
Okay. That's all the questions I had for Wayne.
No problem. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions from members of the board on the testimony given by Mr. Ingram this evening? Okay, members of the public, questions for Mr. Ingram on the testimony given this evening? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Ingram.
Thank you.
Mr. Roth, did you need to call Mr. Shotland?
Yes, I think there were a question or two that were left open that he was asked to look into. So Doug, I see you're there. Would you address the questions you understand to be open in your aspect and in relation to your testimony?
Good evening, everyone. Yes, as Mr. Ross said, a few questions were left unanswered last time, and I wanted to give you some more information. Let me share my screen. Looks like I'm not able to do that.
Should be now. Try again. Sorry.
Okay.
That's not part of our design.
Yeah, the fish, definitely not. Not making any more of those. All right, does everyone see sheet A15?
Yes, I just want to make sure, Kara, this was submitted ahead of time, met the 48-hour rule, posted on the website, correct?
Yes, I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing. So this is Gary, this was your angled roof exhibit that we were looking at last week's meeting, but it just wasn't
Yes.
submitted enough time.
Yes, I've put together a supplemental drawing set. It's called Supplemental Drawings 12, 14, 21, and it's 3 sheets.
All right, so supplemental drawings, and those drawings are labeled.
A15,
Okay, so it's just one.
A16,
Okay.
and A17.
And A16 and A17. Okay, and the date of those were again?
December 14th, 2021.
But they were submitted to the board.
Yeah, I mean, the name of the document is 12/14/21, but the date on the drawings is 12/9.
Okay, so again, so just so I have this correct, you wanted to submit an exhibit at the last meeting, but it wasn't submitted in enough time, so we did
Right.
not. This
Right.
is one of, or part, this incorporates that photograph in addition to other photographs.
Right.
Okay, and was submitted to Eileen when?
I believe Thursday or Friday last week.
Okay. All right, great. So why don't we do this? We will mark this then as exhibit, what are we on? A1, 2, 3, this will be exhibit 4.
Kara, just a clarification, they're not just photographs, they're drawing sheets.
Yes, no, that's correct. That's
You
correct.
you referenced them as photographs.
Excuse me, sorry about that.
No,
Yes,
just for the
correct.
record.
Correct. Okay, so that's exhibit 4.
Okay. So I prepared this set of images to explain what you can see of the roof from Main Street. It's a combination of photos, aerial photos, street photos, and a rendering and a drawing, an elevation. So what I've done, I'm going to kind of walk you through it. I've looked at 3 different scenarios. What you would see if you're standing about 200 feet from the building, what you'd see if you stand about 250 feet from the building, and what you'd see if you stand 323 feet from the building. So just to make a point, I'll explain how I did this in a second. So if you look at this drawing right here, see this little white line? If you're standing here on Main Street, looking diagonally at the roof of the building on our site, you're about 200 feet away. And what you would see is this. This is from Google Maps. So you'd see this, and you'd see, if the building were built, you would see something like this. You would not see the roof top because of the angle at which you're looking at the roof. You'd only see the edge. And this diagram shows that. This person is standing about 200 feet from the building, and this blue line is the angle of his line of sight. And you can see that he can see the edge of the roof, but not what's on top of it. So at that point, a person on the street can't see the roof. So the next place I want to show you is from 250 feet, a little further away. You can't see the roof in that case because of the angle, but also because it's obscured by trees. So back to the map, you're now here and you're 250 feet away from the roof. And you can see there's some trees here that are in the way. Half the year you'll be able to see through them, half you won't. But back to the diagram, if you're here at 250 feet, this red line shows what you would see if you looked at the roof. Your line of sight is parallel to the roof at that point. So you would see the roof edge, but you would also not see anything on top of it, just like before if you're closer. You'd have to go further away to see anything on top of the roof. So I took another case even further away, 323 feet. You can see your line of sight here. The angle is flatter than the roof pitch. Now you can see the roof. So you can see just a little bit of it, but you're now so far away that you wouldn't be able to see much, and plus you're obscured by, your view is obscured by trees again. This is kind of what it would look like. So you really can't see anything. So that is my point. No matter where you are, your view is either obscured by trees, or you're just too far away, or you're too close. And your angle of your view is cut off by the roof edge. So the point is that visibility of the solar panels from the street is not really a problem. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was recycling and waistband enclosures. I did some renderings here of what they would look like. You can zoom in on here, and this is the one at the back of the front building. You can see that it's got wood doors with inset recessed metal panels that sort of match the back building. And the frame, which you can't see, is pressure treated wood. So outside is cedar and metal. Inside that you can't see is pressure treated. They're tall enough, they cover the top of the 95-gallon bins, but they're open on top so that you can reach over easily to open up the top and put the trash or recycling in. And there's another one here to the right. There's some other views. So again, the 95-gallon recycling bins are 45 inches tall, and the enclosure height is 48 inches. And materials are cedar, corrugated metal, and treated lumber frame. The next thing I wanted to go over was snow guards. I believe it was Mayor Driver who brought this up. Snow guards are, we were planning to use them at the bottom edge of the back building roof. We do need them to keep snow from sliding off these solar panels. And this is almost exactly what it would look like. This is a standing seam roof. This is a 3-bar snow guard. This is the kind of snow guard that you see in ski resorts. In places where they get heavy snow, we probably will not see that kind of snow, but who knows? So we have to prepare for the worst. And this is a pretty heavy duty snow guard that would definitely stop any large mass of snow from sliding off the roof. And as the snow melts, it would trickle down below the snow guard into the gutter. The gutter is built in to the roof. You don't see that here. Our gutter would be built in and be a pretty big trough, about 1 foot wide and the full length of the roof. So any water that gets past this will trickle into the gutter and be carried away in pipes. Another issue that came up was the size of this back building relative to other buildings in the area, like the courthouse. And reason I did this rendering is to show you that an elevation like what we saw before, a pure elevation of the streetscape, doesn't really give you a true sense of how tall buildings look. It may give you a sense of how tall they actually are, but how they look to a person on the street is a very different thing. This back building is set far back from the street, so it's smaller because things recede as they get towards the horizon. So this building is taller, but the column height is about the height of our back building. But you can see the courthouse looks much bigger. So this is this is more of a true interpretation of what people would see from the street. And the elevation is really a diagram. It's an abstraction usable to make certain points, but this is what it would look like on the street. And just in case anyone was wondering, the back building is 39.5 feet tall. The courthouse is almost 50 feet tall at the ridge. Cupola is a little taller. The height difference is exaggerated because the courthouse is closer to the camera, and the camera height is 5.5 feet off the ground. Other questions that came up that I don't have images for, I think Mr. Clerico asked about the slab condition in the back building, the concrete slab. My understanding is the building was built in 1924 and it was designed for heavy equipment and trucks. And while we haven't done a test bore, I have inspected the slab, and there are no significant cracks that I could see. In my experience with buildings that age, the people who built them did not skimp on the concrete. It's probably way overdone. So I'm not concerned about it being capable of carrying cars. Cars are, much lighter than what it was designed for. What else? Someone asked, I think one of the board members asked about a column in the garage. And I want to bring up my original set of drawings, which was submitted a while back. So this has already been shown. This is the plan of the back building. This is where we're proposing to put a column. We will need one somewhere in here, and the best place to put it, I think, is right in the middle, where it will not interfere with car doors opening. It'll be pretty easy to walk around. So it's really the most innocuous place for it to go, but we probably will need one. And other than that, I just want to make a few concluding remarks. Again, as I said last time, I believe this project is going to be an asset to the town. It supports several master plan goals. It will do its part to revitalize the center of town, in particular, a property that needs a little bit of sprucing up. It's a super energy efficient building that we're proposing. It's net zero, meaning that it will use no electricity from the grid at the end of the year, net it out. It'll produce as much as it uses. And we believe that will set the standard for future green development in the town and in the whole area. And we'll be producing clean energy on site, which is another borough goal. I'm happy to take any other questions people have.
Thank you, Mr. Shalin. Could you stop sharing screen so that it might be easier for me to see who needs to ask a question? Our professionals first.
Yeah,
Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, so just a clarification, you say that building was originally constructed as a garage for heavy equipment, and the floor that's in there can be utilized in its current fashion without any modification as a garage floor?
As a garage floor, yes. For passenger cars, yes.
Okay. And does that floor have a slope to it? Is it required to have a slope to it for using it as a garage?
I couldn't tell. There's a lot of it's being used for storage right now, so it's kind of hard to tell if there's a slope. But and I don't know that, I don't think that's a code requirement. But we could certainly, if we wanted to put one in, we could certainly add to what's there. But I would not recommend taking it up. It's probably a huge amount of concrete. We have to dispose of it. Seems kind of like a needless thing to do.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob. Beth, did you have anything for the applicant's architect?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay, and Scott, nothing, right? You're good. Members of our board, questions of the testimony given this evening by Mr. Shotland. I saw Susan had a hand before. Go ahead. You're muted, Susan. There you go.
Yeah, I was just trying to hit the button quicker, sorry. Doug, it's slab on grade construction existing, correct? That garage floor, correct?
Yes.
Do you have any idea of how thick that slab is?
I don't know. We haven't done a test.
And did you anticipate having to do any type of trench cuts for utilities? Most renovations, you usually have to trench cut some of the slab on grade.
Yes.
If you do.
We
Okay.
expect that, yeah. And we also will have to do cut a number of footings for columns.
Well, yeah, there's the 3 columns down the center I saw. So yeah, just as a clarification, Doug pointed out the center column, but there are 2 others that are on the sides of the building as well, but those are clearly structural as well. Okay, so I did assume that there's, every renovation has some trench cutting. So I did expect that answer. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
That's all I've got for Doug.
Thanks, Susan. Any other board members with questions for the applicant's architect on the testimony given this evening? Okay, any members of the public with questions for Mr. Shotland on the testimony given this evening, please click on raise hand or *9 if you're on the phone. Okay, seeing none. Mr. Roth, do you have any other witnesses to call?
No, we don't, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief closing statement.
Yeah, so where we are on time, it's 9:05. So why don't you make your closing statement? Then we'll take our brief break as we usually do around this time. And then when we return, we'll do comments from members of the public and board discussion, right? Kara, that's our order. I think I've got that right. So Mr. Roth, please.
Thank you. This is something that a property that I acquired more than 20 years ago. I moved from 8 Main Street, a property I developed many years before that, and came down to this property. And my intention was to turn the entire thing into an office, essentially a law office. The renovations were done with that in mind, and you've all been invited, to anyone who wanted to tour the building, and there is a public website which has all of the pictures of the building back from the time I acquired it. It's a building I've known a long time. In fact, when I was in high school, I bought a baseball glove from Curtis Sporting Goods, which occupied the ground floor of the building. So it's been around a while in that position. A lot of work was done on it. A lot of money was spent on it. And things happen in the economy, and the idea of creating what I'd intended has somewhat evaporated, at least. And we all know that over the past few years, the demand for office space, when I used the full front building for quite a few years, but rented out the back building until we were ready to use it, and never grew to the size where we needed the back building. And as tenants left the back building, and then we began to shrink, it's gotten to the point where I now am the only occupant of the two buildings. And there is virtually no demand for office space. I've had 3 different real estate brokers work with me and try to fill the buildings. And so the idea that came partly from your 2015 report and meetings I've attended and observed and heard, it seemed appropriate to create the mix and bring some residential in. I did some legal work for the Shotlands, who did the building on the corner of Main and Mine, 123 Main Street, and have stayed in touch. And I know that their residential part of that property has been the main success of that property, and the quality of the apartments they've made available and the people that it has attracted has caused me to get involved with with them as the architect and a consultant. Doug thus did the architectural work, and I like the quality of what he has done down there, and I like the way Gary has managed it and the tenants that he has attracted. And we've seen that it's worked, and we've seen what's worked and attempted to do that here. You determined that the idea of 9 apartments was, as you've said in your resolution of an earlier application, was too great a density. There were other things that we listened to. In hearing what you said, we've come in with Plan B, which is the application before you now. It's the same property, but it's 1/3 less apartments. We won't be offering any ground floor apartments. I'm disappointed in that, because there is a particular market for ground floor apartments. But I think we've made the adjustments to meet what you talked about and wanted. I have personally been here over 20 years. I've never had a conflict in getting in and out of the driveway. Nobody has ever backed out of the driveway into the street, for my knowledge, and certainly nobody's ever needed to do so. We've been able to maneuver and get around in the space that we have. It is in one sense, when Tom did his report initially, he said it was a typical lot. And I pointed out to him that it was, but it wasn't, because it's the only lot I know that essentially has a courtyard between the two buildings because of the close proximity of the buildings to the north and the south. I get along well with the owner of the building to the north. They frequently have to use my property to access the exterior of their building to do things like work on their roof and their gutters and various other things. And so there's a good relationship. There's been no problem between us in terms of how we use our properties, and I don't expect that there would be one. What we offer is almost exactly what you called for in 2015. We offer something that's probably greener than I might have thought of myself if I wasn't using Doug Schottland as an architect who's really into that. Probably I'm influenced by my grandchildren, who the youngest one is finishing college, and she's studying forestry, and they're all into a green life, and they've influenced me. They've also told me several things that interest me, even though you wanted them, and we've provided outside parking for bicycles and parking in the garage. They tell me most of their friends, and Gary tells me down at his units on 123 Main, young people tend to buy much more expensive bicycles than I think I have ever bought or would buy. And they all bring them inside. They're not going to leave them out in the weather. But we've provided the things that you've asked for. We think this will be a real asset in town. I want to keep my own office for at least a few more years. Eventually, I won't be the owner of this, as someday you won't be the owner of the property you own and live in. So I've got to take into consideration what would make it attractive to people who might follow me. I think we've designed something that is wanted. I think we designed something for which there's a much greater market than there is a market for offices in town. Many of my friends tell me they're never going to be in an office similar to what we have been used to in the past 20 years. And I think we've looked to accommodate that. The design and keeping the downstairs as an office is something that makes sense to me. It also, I fully understand that if the market gets to the point where there's a demand for retail, I suspect that any office use will be pushed out because there will be greater rent paid for the retail. Until that happens, I hope to occupy it as an office. I don't see any real detriment. I think you can approve this project, and if you have a concern that you may lose grant money, it can be conditioned on our having to find another way to get our utilities into the property without interfering with the legal requirements of your grant. If it has to remain empty because you're not willing to give this approval, I'd probably just have to look at it as worth a lot less than the tax assessor says it's worth and deal with it from that perspective. But at this point, I'm hoping that you will approve what I consider a very good proposal, a compromise proposal from my viewpoint, but one that I think will fill with the demand that I understand exists. And I look forward to getting another project underway, as this was a project more than 20 years ago, and as 8 Main Street was many years before that. I no longer own 8 Main Street, but I did at one point. And I look forward to finishing what might be my development career with getting this building underway with people that'll be part of it with me. So with that, I ask that you approve the necessary variances. I think they're very minor. We've eliminated all the D variances. We're not doing anything that you say you don't want to see used. Most of the conditions that we have are pre-existing conditions. It makes no sense to think you're going to move buildings of this size to meet setback requirements. And although there's a great change in the use of cars, I attended a program recently where a man tried to convince the audience that we're going to have less and less cars. He might be right, and maybe he isn't, but we live with what we've got, and I think the market's going to determine whether this project approved and built is meeting the need of people, I think it will, or we wouldn't be here seeking approval to do it. And we ask for that approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. As I said before, we're going to take our normal break here, and then we'll come back and continue with the public hearing. Eileen, can you pause the recording? I want to give everyone 5 minutes. So let's say 9:20, 9:22, we'll round up. All right. Can we
Jeff,
do a
why don't
roll
we
call? Yeah.
Yeah, roll call, yeah.
Look, Eileen, we just do a quick roll call just to make sure on the record we've got everybody back.
Sure. Mayor Driver,
Here.
Mr. Long,
Here.
Mr. Campion,
Here.
Mr. Dasha,
Here.
Mrs. Engelhardt,
Here.
Mr. Cook,
Here.
Mr. Budney,
I am here.
Mr. Hain,
Here.
Ms. Giffen,
Yeah.
Mr. Hill,
Here.
Mr. Norton,
Here.
Mr. Levitt,
Here.
Ms. Weitzman,
Here.
Ms. Kaczynski,
Here.
Mr. Clerico,
Here.
Ms. McManus,
Here.
Mr. Kennel.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I am going to move the applicant and the witnesses out of the panelists because they don't necessarily need to be hanging up here at the moment. And I'll just do that in a second. But before the next order of business is to, if there are members of the public who wish to make a comment on this application, now is the time to do that. I do see we have 2 attendees in the audience. I want to make sure, Eileen, we did not receive any comment on this application by email or voicemail or snail mail or carrier pigeon, right?
No, we did not.
Okay, so because of the rules of electronic meetings, that could be read into the record at this point, but having none, we won't have to worry about that. We do have 2 members. I do see at least 2 folks logged in on the audience. If someone would like to speak for up to 3 minutes, now is the time to do that. All right, I'm not seeing anybody there right now. So I'm going to move Mr. Roth and the witnesses back into the attendee panel as we continue forward. Just give me half a moment to do that. Just making sure. Yes, good. Okay. So I'm going to ask our board's professionals who have already been sworn in if they wanted to provide any further testimony for the board's benefit as we're, for the application. And then members of the board, you'll have a chance to ask them questions that you might have, and then we'll have board discussion. Okay. So let's take this first. Scott, was there anything beyond what you had said before that you or Jay wanted to add?
The only thing I want to, I guess, just follow up on Jay's testimony last week. I know he mentioned there's a lot of discussion about pedestrian activity as vehicles come from the back driveway and the safety aspects of that going onto Main Street. And, his recommendation is that there be planters added on adjacent to the building, just so that it keeps the pedestrians kind of further away from the building's edge in case someone is coming out. So again, I just put that out there based on Jay's prior testimony.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Does anybody have any questions for Scott? And it could be anything about traffic because Jay briefed him on everything. So I see Susan, you had a hand up.
Yeah, I had a question for Scott earlier. Hi, Scott. It's good to see you again, by the way. Thanks for filling in tonight.
You're welcome.
My question is, When, I guess it's more of a kind of in general question, but I think it'll help with me analyzing this application. In general, when a board is asked to consider a parking variance of some sort, just because, and in the past, this board in particular is usually very willing to issue parking variances because of the kind of supporting nature of retail and Main Street and kind of foot traffic and activity on the street. That being said, when you're considering a parking variance, one of the things that I think you have to look at is very site specific. So just because you've issued variances for other locations along Main Street, that doesn't necessarily mean that this particular site should be treated the same way as others. So now here's kind of, this leads to my question. Does this particular site in general, because of its location along Main Street, it's very separated from the two kind of, we talked about how the circulation goes around the block, kind of from Kapner down by the post office, north on Main Street, passes the site, and then turns, the first right you can make is on mine, and then kind of wraps around Park. And that's kind of the vehicular movement around the site. It's the grid is kind of broken in this area. It doesn't cut through at this particular site. So it's kind of really halfway between those two, Kapner and Mine streets. So I guess my question is it reasonable to, is it realistic for us to consider parking lots that are down by the new courthouse really viable for this, to serve this particular parcel?
Well, I think you can. Again, this type of use in the apartments, which is the primary traffic generator, this is not transient type parkers, people that are parking like retail and are kind of just feeling their way around. This is going to be residents who are going to do that research ahead of time and have to have a sense of what's involved, parking, and whether they have to do off-site parking. And that, it's their daily users. So the fact that the tenants are someone that's going to be here on a daily basis, that's something they obviously have to assess and see whether that's acceptable to them. But because of the fact that it's residents, they're here on a daily basis, it's my opinion, I'm comfortable with what has been presented. Whereas if it was a more transient type use, then I'd be a little more concerned.
Great. Thanks, Scott.
You're welcome.
Other questions for Scott on traffic? Todd, go ahead.
Scott, it was either yourself or somebody else mentioned that one of the most important elements on his plan is, I'm going to be sarcastic, is that dopey shoplifter mirror that's half screwed to the telephone pole. Is there not a better, more suitable, I guess, mirror, for lack of a better thing, that you wouldn't find in a five and dime? I mean, I know it's all for safety, but I've never seen that mirror used outside of the back of a 30-year-old Walgreens.
It's amazing. I mean, Jay did mention that to me, but then again, that is something that is unique to this, but that it is definitely beneficial. You don't want something very large because it comes in obstruction, and I think it would lose its utility because you'd be replacing it more often in something that's a little more obscure and smaller in nature. still provides a benefit.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions on traffic? All right, I'm going to go to Bob next, so that Beth, you can kind of wrap up with the talking about the relief requested and proofs and all that stuff. So Bob, is there anything that you want to add? And obviously you've got your review letter there and there's been testimony over 2 nights.
Yeah, as I indicated, there was a stormwater assessment submitted late yesterday or sometime yesterday. I saw it late yesterday. I had a brief chance just to look at it. I don't, some of the things I was asking for in the way of analysis, I didn't see in it. I don't want to overly comment one way or the other because I haven't totally reviewed the document. It's my report, I think, speaks for itself. I think what we've learned factually in the way of testimony on this application is that this property does come with an easement on the adjoining property that has not been utilized in the past, but according to the testimony that's been presented, it does exist. It does have rights that are associated with this property. Mr. Roth, I believe, testified that, at least I asked a question, I think the response was that the adjoining owner, which happens to be the county, does not have access rights through this property. So it's a one-way restrictive easement, gives them rights to use the county property, but does not necessarily convey any rights to the county to access their property if that was feasible from Main Street. I'm not going to speak to the traffic issue except to observe that there will be more vehicles using the driveway if this project were approved than have used it in the past. I think Mr. Ross, I think the indication was there's only 4 parking spaces, only 4 vehicles could have gone in there in the past, and now there's going to, whatever we ended up with here, I think 11 vehicles. So there will be more use of that driveway. And you've heard the testimony on the turning movements and whatever limitations, you can judge that, as part of the evaluation of the application, what limitations that may or may not impose. There's been a representation that the separation here is the width of a traffic aisle, which is true, but the traffic aisle here is only about 30 feet long. It's the turning movements to get into it that are the restrictive element. And again, if there's any questions about other comments in my report, I could certainly, address those. I think we heard there was a recommendation to because we're cutting up a lot of the existing sidewalk that was not done that's outside the public right of way and the frontage here. There was a recommendation, I believe, Mr. Roth agreed that they would do that, replace that sidewalk as part of this particular project. There was some comment made about grading in that. There's not enough information on here to know the grading, but my presumption would be if it was replaced, it would just be replaced at the current grade. But again, we would need to at some point see some additional detail on that to know if that's even feasible or how you'd go about doing that. There was the other recommendations that Beth had about the planter, which I think I mentioned in my report as well. And what else? Yeah, there is you do have the review letter from Ken Deal, that there is the issue of the sewer service line from the adjoining building, which the representation is that it's more than most likely on this particular property. That was something would need to be resolved with the Borough Sewer Department. But to the extent it exists, there's certainly applicants proposing to put other utilities in that driveway. At the very least, they'd have to locate that so know that they're not proposing something that would conflict with what's already in the ground over there. There might be a couple other points in my report, but again, the report was pretty specific. The only thing I haven't reviewed thoroughly is the new information that's come in on the stormwater. Oh, and just one other observation also. The representation on stormwater is that this is a relatively small site and it be somewhat de minimis in terms of whatever impact. I just want to point out that our ordinance sets a pretty low bar for this, and this goes over that bar. So I mean, granted, it is a very small site, but our ordinance establishes some very small limitations. The 2,000 square foot of disturbance, the 200 square feet of additional impervious. They don't exceed the impervious one because they're indicated they're actually putting in less impervious, but they do exceed the standard for disturbance.
Okay, questions for Bob? Susan?
Bob, is it typical for an applicant in front of this board or any other boards that you represent to, when you've addressed a concern such as stormwater disturbance in this case, that the applicant's argument is it's close enough, and your comment back was there wasn't, you didn't even try. Is that typical that a applicant is,
Well,
I want to
I-
say arrogant enough to
No.
pose that as an argument?
I don't want to say that they didn't try. They submitted some additional information that I haven't had an opportunity to review in detail. So just at glancing, I could see there's a few things that I had asked for, like an analysis of the capacity of the system that's there. I didn't see that in what was submitted. Again, I'll do a more thorough review of that to see.
But no solution was proposed.
I'm sorry?
No solution was proposed to the question, to
No.
the disturbance question.
No, I haven't heard any. I haven't heard any in testimony, and I haven't. I didn't see anything. I did see something in the report that talked about the inability to put something underground because of grade differential. But in the report, they were talking about a 1.5 foot grade differential, and I see on the plan it's like a 3. Again, I don't want to go. I didn't have enough time to really review that in detail to know. I don't want to mistake something here. I don't want to
I understand.
misrepresent.
What is the system that you were suggesting them to consider? Basically, it was kind of an underground temporary holding area, for lack of better. You called it something. I'm not using the correct engineering term.
We kicked the tires a lot the last time about some sort of infiltration system. There were some questions raised by neighbors about impact on the adjoining property. This applicant hasn't been able to do any pre-submission soil testing on the site for obvious practical reasons, to know whether that's a valid concern or not. But there might be a possibility of doing some sort of a shallow, maybe lined subsurface, maybe stone, maybe some sort of a piping, like, I don't want to refer to it as a reverse septic system, but something along that line. So there might be some ability to do something. Again, I have to really look at what they've just submitted to see if there's, look to be any merits in that or not.
Whether that kind of, and it's completely understandable that that concerns about infiltration with neighbors and stuff like that. And that's why I kind of liked your idea of the kind of temporary holding. And for those that don't necessarily understand that from an engineering point of view, the water, from what I understand, Bob, the water basically is anything that's overflow that can't get through the pipe quick enough, kind of goes into this temporary holding area, so that as the storm dissipates and the water, the water kind of loads gets lower, then that kind of holding area then releases its water into the normal stormwater drainage that the rest of the building is already designed for. It's just basically holding it temporarily, right?
It would be what would in typical terms referred to as a detention basin. It'd be a staged storage in a controlled release. You'd probably try to design that to at least accommodate whatever capacity that you're tying into. And that's another challenge in this area, is that this section of Main Street apparently has no storm drainage system.
How big would something like this be? I didn't get the impression it was very, it was pretty shallow is what you're proposing.
Well, if you're working with grade limitations, so yeah, it would have to be something relatively shallow. Exactly how you would design it, what it would be, reason I asked the question about the floor in the building, I was of the assumption that it's part of the demolition, and to make that into a garage floor, I thought it had been built, I thought it had been used as an office, and I just assumed it was a standard floor for like an office, and if you're going to convert it into garage, you'd have to remove it. The
Which is why
representation-
I asked about the concrete cuts.
Right,
They
the
are actually
representation-
going to be cutting up that floor in some way, shape or form.
Well, yeah, to what extent, I'm not sure.
Right.
But the response we heard tonight was that no, this building was actually built as a garage for heavy equipment, was the testimony. And then based on that, they're assuming that it was designed for that. It's a fairly thick floor. I was just looking for a practical solution. If you're going to rip the floor up anyway, that might be an area to put it in. You may also have some options of putting something in under the parking lot, but it would have to be shallow, and it would have to have some limitations on, what it might accomplish. But
So whether you're cutting a 4 to 12-inch slab with your normal saw cutting for renovations, or whether you're putting this solution out under the parking lot, you were just trying to find a solution, or as far as helping them trying to find a location for that.
Yeah,
possibility.
We've dealt with this provision of the ordinance on a couple of different applications, and there's been in the past, there's always been an attempt to do something to try to address it. This site obviously has its challenges, but by the same token, it's discharged. Like I said, we have a section of Main Street here, and I don't know the history of what the flooding conditions, I don't know if it's the word flooding, but what the conveyance and drainage conditions on Main Street are. We do know, we just have these trench gutters that go out to the gutter line on the street, that there is no storm drainage system per se on the street. And albeit this is a relatively small site, again, we have an ordinance that has a relatively low threshold for that very reason.
Okay.
So
I hope that a solution was proposed in that report. We don't know for sure, but you answered my questions as far as, I just wanted to get a feel of what you had in mind and whether it was really doable, or, I got the impression from your testimony that it was, I guess the word you kept using over and over again was reasonable. I believe that was the descriptor word you used, whether it was a reasonable, whether there was a reasonable solution or a doable solution or not. And I got the impression that you were in disagreement with how reasonable a solution you were proposing was.
well, I don't know that we've heard any discussion about a solution. Just the fact that we have an ordinance.
Recommendations, yeah.
Yeah, we have an ordinance that requires something under these set of circumstances. And so far, we've heard testimony from Wayne tonight that there's no practical way of doing anything.
That's the terms I heard.
I haven't, I have to look at what if I have an idea, I'll certainly throw it out there. But if
well, your idea that you proposed does seem practical, but okay. The next question I had for you, Bob, because I don't want to take up everybody's time, is the boring, the grant boring ordinance issue that, like Jeff so well said, has been avoided and kind of gone beating around the bush for months and months and months. So I'm glad we're finally addressing that. Do you have any concerns with the putting the grant aside? If the lawyers say we wouldn't violate the grant by doing the boring method, for lack of better term, do you have any concerns with that method to get their utilities under the sidewalk, understanding the fact that the boring method violates another part of our ordinance?
Well, that goes to a utility connection issue, which is really not under my jurisdiction. I'm sure the borough has a prohibition against boring for a valid reason. There were comments about how these utilities have to connect into the pipe. We did get a fairly detailed review this time from the borough engineer on the utility connection issues. I do know you're dealing with grants. I believe these were federal monies. And they would move, I would be shocked if they didn't have some sort of a provision that would, have a moratorium or something. How restrictive it is, like Mike says, when the clock starts ticking, I certainly don't know.
The means and methods phrase that Wayne used was right down my alley, because as you know, I'm a spec writer. So when he said that kind of put a little light bulb, and I think he's absolutely right. You have to find the correct means and methods for, specific to each site. I guess my question to you is, whether or not our ordinance allows it, does this boring method, would it be an appropriate, would you recommend it to your client as an appropriate means and methods to provide utility service to this site? Or do you have any other concerns about boring in general when it comes, specific to this site?
Kind of a broad question, but
Sorry.
Let me say this: if the connections were to be made out into Main Street, and if you were absolutely precluded from doing any surface modification to the existing sidewalk that's built out there, that would probably be the only means and method open to you. Now, whether that violates, how that might violate the borough ordinance and the concerns the borough has with that, I mean, it does come with other. I mean, there's other utilities in that particular area. We know we know there's the sewer line for the adjoining building that's there. There may be others. I'm not sure. There's nothing represented on the plan in the way of just other utilities in that particular area. And whether that boring, even if it was allowed by the borough, whether that somehow violates a provision of the grant would be another. Again, you're dealing with another entity, a third-party entity who funded this, and at the end of the day, they have the final say as to whether you met the criteria or you didn't meet the criteria. So it's obviously a concern. And
okay.
I've seen a lot of projects where there, as the mayor mentioned, DOT applications, there's a 5-year moratorium that prevents connections. And I've seen projects that they have to wait 5 years for just putting in normal kind of an installation. Again, there's always exceptions, as Mike indicated, for health, safety, and welfare, a break or something. But usually they prohibit any kind of normal new connections or reconnections or expansion of connections.
Okay, great. Thanks for your feedback on that.
Thanks, Susan. Other questions for Bob? Mayor, go ahead. You're muted, sorry.
Susan asked about like the holding thing for the stormwater, which is a big concern of mine. You mentioned that, they mentioned in their testimony that the floor was built for heavy equipment. This might be outside of your ability to answer, but can we compare, or can you tell us maybe what the heavy equipment was in the late 1920s or early 1930s from when it would have been built? Was it a Model T with the bigger engine in it?
I have no idea, Mayor. It's first I heard tonight that this was used as a garage. I didn't know that up to this point. I wasn't aware that was the use of this particular building in the past. I know today it's used as an office, or it had been, most recent use was an office.
Yeah.
And I assume that's how the floor was built, but they're indicating that's not the case. So.
Okay. It was a Model T with a yoke, and it's different weight, I think. On the stormwater, the grate that goes under the sidewalk. So right now, the existing building, when we get a heavy rain, it goes off to both sides. I think there's 2 sidewalk grates that come out into the gutter on Main Street. Now with this new roof, it's all gonna go into one side, and as I recall, it was a 4-inch pipe.
Yeah, what's represented, and I've never, haven't been out there to actually inspect this myself. What's represented on the plan, I've been to the site, I just never got out to look at the drains and what's connected to them. What's represented on the plan is that there's 2 trench drains that go from the side. They don't show any pipes connecting to them, so exactly what water they're picking up, I'm not sure. But their plan is to run the piping for the new building, subsurface out to the driveway and connect the roof leader discharge for the modified building out front into that system on the one side, and on the other side of the building out front, they're going to collect and connect the roof drain from that side and connect it into that other trench drain that's there. But what's connecting into them today, I don't know. There's nothing represented on the plan that there's anything connected into them, but that's their proposal is to do that. How large those trench stays are, what capacity they might have, we heard testimony from Wayne that it wouldn't be adequate to accommodate whatever flow would be coming out, albeit the representation has been made is that flow will be somewhat reduced from at least these new drainage calculations we submitted reportedly show that it's a reduction in flow. But what they're tying into doesn't have adequate capacity for it. And the representation, their system would be designed so that if once it reached whatever capacity it had, the water would just flow on the, up out onto the surface and flow out to the street that way.
So what happens if there's more rain coming off of that roof? This is, if there's more rain coming off of the roof and that pipe out to the street can handle, where does that water go?
It would go on.
Does it go into someone's basement? Does it go up over the roof? Where does it go?
The way they're representing it, if the piping system they're installing reaches its capacity, there'd be overflows that would just discharge the water onto the surface. They've graded the site so the surface drains from the back of the site out to the street. That's the representation. I don't think there's anything more than that in the new calculations that came in, but again, I haven't reviewed them in detail yet.
Okay, so if you can then help me with the plans, because I'm not an engineer, I don't know how to read the plans in the detail. In the back between the front building and the back building, I guess along the sides of the other 2 buildings along the property lines where that subsurface pipe is it completely underground, or is it like a French drain that goes out and it overflows into the parking lot?
They are representing it as a 4-inch diameter PVC pipe. Your standard white pipe is what they're proposing for a connection. Well, we heard the architect testify to tonight that the new building will have a built-in gutter system that's internal. Actually, the downspouts will be coming internal through the walls. I think he described it as a significant gutter system of, I think he said a foot wide, perhaps. I'm not sure there's a detail, but something of substance because you have a fairly substantial roof sloped all in one direction toward the south. That would be picked up in this gutter system. Once it got underground, whatever system they have on the building and conveyance through the walls, once it gets underground, they're representing is just going to go in a 4-inch pipe. Which is obviously going to have less capacity than a 12-inch gutter might have. So, and again, where it connects, the only point of connection they have available to them is that trench grate, whatever size. Again, it's not listed on the plan what size it is or what slope it's at, and that eventually just discharges into the gutter of Main Street. So that's the limitations they're working with. They're acknowledging that at least if I understood Wayne's testimony tonight in the last meeting, they're acknowledging that does not have the capacity to accommodate certain types of year event storms. I think Wayne indicated he would take the more frequent, lower intensity storms, but not the larger storms. Again, I'm not sure what degree of magnitude those are. And that when it doesn't accommodate that kind of flow, it just flows on the surface out to the street.
Okay, thank you. Chairman, am I allowed to ask a question of the traffic engineer, which I,
Yeah, we can go back. That's fine. We'll, because we got it out of order. That's fine. We'll get Scott back.
Yeah.
And then, and we'll make sure we get everyone for Bob too.
okay, it's one question and I think it's quick. So when we talk about mixed or shared parking in these situations, because isn't the assumption that people are leaving the parking spot to go to work in the daytime when the workers come in?
Well, that's correct. These uses are generally compatible. I mean, where it may not be so much if you had a retail use that was sharing the parking and you have retail employees on a weekend when the residents are home. But my understanding was that these spaces were going to be generally assigned to the specific apartment unit, whether it's a 2-bedroom or a 1-bedroom. So, the shared parking, I think, is very limited to really, I think it's Mr. Roth's parking space versus maybe another residential because of the tandem type parking we have here, it's basically going to be assigned parking. That was my understanding.
Okay. Have those data, that kind of stuff where the assumption that people leave to go to work, the residents leave to go to work, and then the workers come in, is there any new data that's come out post-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID, how that workplace has changed?
No, there hasn't, because it's all regionalized. I mean, I can speak to, I'm down in Ocean County, Monmouth County. And my experience is that there's less people telecommuting down in this area than there is, say, north of Raritan River once you start going north and west. So it's really too early, and it's any data is going to be localized more than to, statewide type of research or data.
Okay.
It's all by locale based on my limited experience and just observations over the last 12 months.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all.
Thanks, Mayor. Hannah, go ahead.
She's muted.
Yeah, she got it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Scott, I just had a quick question for you. It might be super simple, or I know that we just got the kind of updated fire marshal report and them talking about making that driveway a fire lane. Does that in any way affect that at the mirror that they have there, or us putting the planners? Does that have any effect on that? Does it matter?
I think it's a good recommendation because it just enforces and encourages that no one either just lets their car run for a little bit while they do something, but just that access aisle has got to be clear at all times.
Right.
No vehicles should be parked there or just standing idling for a short period of time. So, I mean, I think that just helps from the fire safety aspect and being signed, striped, just discourages anybody from
does it matter if there's that mirror there?
Excuse me?
Does that, like that whole the ugly mirror that's there, are they allowed to still have that? Is that something, because it's such a small lane, is that going to be allowed to be there because it would be a fire lane, or does that matter?
Yeah, I don't think that has any impact as long as it doesn't prohibit the Well, again, if reviewing the fire memo, they would not be having any fire vehicles going back in that courtyard area. Everything is going to be walked in, whether it's hoses or ladders.
Okay.
So I don't see where there's anything with that small mirror that prohibits accessibility for an emergency.
Right. Okay. That was my question. That's it.
You're welcome.
Jeremy.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Jeff. I'm going out of order, but Hannah got me thinking.
Sure.
Hi, Scott. So I was wondering about that that lane. Obviously, somebody had mentioned like it would obviously be being used more when there's just more people coming in and out. The sort of the ingress and egress of that lane, how would that affect, and have you looked at how that affects the traffic on Main Street if there's just more people in and out? And if, like, I was trying to imagine just best case scenarios and worst case scenarios. Best case scenario is it's smooth and doesn't change anything. worst case is like somebody's coming out, somebody's on Main Street, and there's like a little jam up of like, okay, thanks for letting me out. And then somebody wants to get in, and then somebody else is coming out. I mean, is that even a possible? I mean, there's got to be millions of scenarios or thousands of scenarios. I don't know.
I agreed, and that's kind of one, when Jay and I were reviewing this, one of the items I asked about as far as traffic activity on Main Street and how that situation may arise. But I think the other, again, there's going to be a little bit of dancing here, for lack of a better term, that the residents, again, the first thing, as I mentioned earlier, that the thing is important. It's people using on a daily basis. The fact that hopefully there's courtesy to the other neighbors. For example, if someone enters in from Main Street, which you have a fairly wide sidewalk there, so it gives people enough awareness to see what's going on versus some other Main Street areas where we only have 5 to 6 feet. Here you have almost 20 feet plus the parking lane. So I think that's an improvement. Again, it's going to be a lot of courtesy of other residents. If someone is turning in and they're halfway down that aisle, and their abilities to be able to back to the courtyard area so that they can then have that vehicle come in and then that other vehicle can leave the site. So I'm not going to say it's a perfect situation, but low speeds, regular users, and given the other comments I mentioned earlier about the wide sidewalk, it should work safely.
Okay, thanks.
See, once we get moving, people ask questions. This is the way it's supposed to work. Good job. All right. I'm going to make sure. Any other questions for Scott? Now that we got Scott, we got people talking about Scott. Okay. No, it's good. All right. Other questions for Bob? All right. I'm going to then ask Beth if you could provide a summary of, you've got your memo, anything you need us to have, summary of the relief sought and proofs necessary for us to consider that relief. Let's kind of put it all together, I think.
Yeah. So first on my memo, just for the record, I do think that the applicant has hit upon the various questions or concerns that I had raised. So I think that their testimony is complete from that perspective. One of the things that my report does, like always, is identifies the items of relief for the application. And here there are a handful of them. Mr. Stearns did go through the planning testimony, but just for everybody's reminding, the first variance is for private garages that exceed more than 3 cars. The borough has a permitted use in accessory use in just about all of its districts where it states private garages are permitted. However, once you trace through the ordinance, what you find is that there's a definition that states private garages are garages for no more than 3 vehicles. Here, we obviously have 8 vehicles, and so that's what triggers the variance. And so I just want to be clear, we're functioning as a planning board. So while this is a use that doesn't meet the definition of the use, it's an accessory use, and that's why we're dealing with it as a C variance. So it doesn't rise to the level of a D variance for a prohibited use. So the applicant rightfully provided the C2 or C testimony for that. In addition, for the variance relief, the applicant also addressed the front yard, and Mr. Stearns provided testimony where he rightfully invoked a provision in our ordinance. There we go. That states that the front yard setback in the DB district, which is stated to be 25 feet, but it also states it may be reduced to the average of the setbacks along the street line. And so he provided testimony in regard to the significantly undersized and not dissimilar setbacks on either side of his building in order to suggest satisfaction of the criteria in one instance, or in the alternative that the variance is actually not necessary. And I do support the testimony that the variance for the front yard setback is not necessary given the average setback on either side of the property that he described. And just for for another reminder, he actually provided testimony stating that the average setback is about 13.92 feet, and he is proposing an average of 12 points, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong number, here we go, 12.85 feet. So 12.85 feet is the proposed condition. In addition to that, the applicant requires rear variance relief for the existing rear building. They also require relief, we've talked about quite a bit, for the number of parking spaces. And on that, I want to note that while the applicant does require relief, they've indicated that the first floor of the front building is currently occupied as office and may continue being occupied by office, but that proposed continuation of that use is a significant trigger for additional parking. I just want the board to recall a recent ordinance that was put into place that stated that retail and restaurant, really active uses that occupy existing building area do not generate a parking demand. But we've heard, while the applicant has indicated that that front building may indeed be occupied by a retail or perhaps a restaurant in the future, right now it's an office and they're looking to receive parking relief so that that office can continue. Notwithstanding, even if there was no parking requirement for a commercial use on that first floor, the applicant would still be in need of relief for 1 parking space. But as a result, they need relief for 5 parking spaces. And then the last 2 variances, we've also heard some testimony about from Bob, as well as others certainly, and they are in regard to the increased impervious cover. The applicant is proposing an impervious cover of 0.95, whereas 0.55 is permitted. The percentage of 0.95 has not changed, although the applicant did testify that they are creating, or I guess reducing is a better word to say, reducing the impervious cover by, I think, 57 feet. So there is a slight decrease in impervious cover. And then the last variance is in regard to the stormwater BMP issues that have been discussed. One point on the private garages that I feel I've got to disclose to the board is I had previously recommended to the council that they eliminate that definition of private garages and eliminate that limitation in this district, and that they would perhaps conditionally permit structured parking. So while I have made that recommendation, I just want to also be clear that that ordinance has not been introduced by the council. So there's no, I'm not trying to suggest that variance relief is not necessary. I just want to be upfront about previous recommendations that I've made to other facets of the borough. So regardless of the ins and outs and the details of these variances, all of them are C variances. As I said at the outset, we're not dealing with any use variances, D1, D6, etc., as we had been in the previous application. This application relies solely on C variance relief. The applicant testified, Mr. Stearns testified, that all of these variances can be justified under the C2 criteria, and that's sometimes referred to as the flexible C, or benefits versus detriments C variance. So ultimately, and I don't want to rehash and characterize Tom's testimony, especially since he just gave it this evening. But ultimately, what the variance requires, or the relief requires, is that the board be able to make a finding that the alternative being presented is more beneficial than the as of right, or the zoning, the strict application of the zoning requirement. When we say more beneficial, it means, yes, in part, practically, that there are benefits of the application that are going to outweigh those detriments. But it also means, as part of that, that there are one or more purposes of the municipal land use law that are advanced by the application. And that needs to be applied for each of the variances. Mr. Stearns testified that there were a handful of municipal land use law purposes that he felt were advanced by the application for various reasons. He also provided some testimony in regard to the negative criteria that addressed any substantial detriment to the public good and any substantial detriment to the zone plan. And on the zone plan in particular, I want to highlight, Mr. Stearns did go through the master plan objectives that you can find, but for anybody that wants to see those in more detail, I do have a recitation of quite a few of those in the back of my report, because as a property that is centrally located in the downtown business district and along Main Street, as you can imagine, as many of you may recall, we actually have quite a few master plan goals and objectives that are relevant to the application, both specifically in terms of not that specifically, but specifically addressing some of the uses, not the specific property, but also more generally about the borough as a whole. And Mr. Stearns invoked many of those during his testimony. And there is actually, I'm sorry, one other item of relief that I just wanted to address. One of the topics in my report goes through all of the solar array criteria that are set forth in section 2639. And there were a number of items that were clearly not applicable or did not require relief. One of the items that I had requested variance, rather testimony on, to determine if variance relief was necessary. And that was to ensure that solar panels, support structures, conduits, etc., blend into the surrounding features of the historic resource. The overall visibility and reflectivity of solar panels and the support structures can be substantially reduced if elements of the solar installation match the surrounding building fabric in color. I do think that the applicant, actually Mr. Shotland, provided extensive testimony on the visibility of those panels, but I just wanted to highlight that item so that the board can make a determination as to whether or not the solar panels properly blend into the features of the historic resource. So essentially the buildings located on the property. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thanks, Beth. I'm going to ask you the question that I asked their planner, because I want to hear your thoughts on does this question about the grant or the borough's ordinance around boring under Main Street because of concerns about utility infrastructure, is that in and of itself sufficient under the third prong of substantial detriment to the public good, or is this more of a technical matter that the planning board is more of a technical matter that needs to be left to the borough to work out with the applicant as a, but it goes beyond what we would consider under that criteria. Did you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think so. If I don't seem to hit the question, let me know. But if the applicants, if the project is approved, if they construct the project and that results in the municipality having to give back millions of dollars or perhaps never receiving the reimbursement, I do think that could rise to the level of substantial public or substantial detriment to the public good. That said, and maybe Bob or one of your other professionals can correct me, but that said, it seems to me that the board could condition any approval on simply that not occurring, that the construction be done in such a way, either in terms of construction method or timing, that possibility is eliminated. And the burden would then sit with the applicant to work cooperatively with the borough to find a way to facilitate that construction without violating the condition, or simply understand that full development of this site may need to wait for the end of that moratorium period.
No, you answered it for me, because I want to find a way to make this work, but I also want to find a way to make sure that we're not opening up the borough to huge problems, right?
Yeah,
and so I'm somewhat comfortable with what you're describing as a condition of approval, but I don't want to. We're not talking now. This is just question.
Right.
So
I have an idea for that condition too, Jeff, when we get to that.
All right. So let's put a pin in that. Other questions for Beth on the planning stuff? I'm going to reopen it again. Any members of the board with questions for our experts, we can go back to traffic if you need to, engineer, planning. Any questions?
Jeff, I got a quick question. I'm not sure who it would get directed to.
Ask it,
during the
Mark, and we'll
testim-
get it to the right person. That's okay.
Okay, regarding, there was testimony of, it was suggested to put planter boxes to direct people away from the building towards the main street. The question is the planter boxes with a S or one of them? Because I believe the property right now there's like a foot of it belongs to the neighbor. So if that foot went towards Main Street, would we be putting a box on the neighbor's property and one on Mr. Roth's property? Is there approval to do that? Are we opening the rest of the businesses up to put planter boxes along the sideway to decorate their eating areas outside and stuff? I just want to make sure by doing that, it's approved and you have your adjacent property owner's approval to do that.
So I see Bob's got his hand up, Scott's unmuted, and Beth's leaning in. So I think all three of them want a chance at your question, Mark. But Bob followed the rules and used the raise hand feature. So I'm going to call up Bob first.
To answer your question, they would not have any, they don't own any property on the north side where the adjoining building is. If they put anything in there, they have to put it in the driveway, which obviously they can't do. I think the suggestion was to put it along the front of the building, the applicant's building, either on the north side or south side, or maybe perhaps both, depending on the aesthetics of it. So so a person walking down the sidewalk would see ahead of them before they cross the driveway some obstruction that would maybe lead them to walk further away from the building. So they wouldn't be in such close proximity for a visual obstruction or restriction for a vehicle coming out. The pedestrian would have a better chance of seeing a vehicle coming out the driveway, and the driver may have some limited advantage of seeing a pedestrian on the sidewalk.
Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And again, looking at the plan and everything else, I don't think there's an opportunity on this. You're looking at from the street, on the right side or the north side, because that business has a doorway right close to the driveway. So if anything, it'd be in front of the Roth building of some kind of significance. So then again, the pedestrian is discouraged from walking right against the building wall. But as far as the legalese and how that's allowed by the township's regulations, I'll defer to Bob on that one.
Beth, you're going to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also going to have to defer on some of the strict legal issues, but I just want to highlight, as you look at Main Street in Flemington, and frankly, in a lot of other municipalities, I think folks are pretty accustomed to seeing stuff located along the buildings, along the sidewalks. I mean, sometimes it's the formalized outdoor eating. Sometimes it's, you know, I'm looking at Street View in Flemington, which albeit is a little bit old at this point, but, you know, folks have Adirondack chairs or some of the merchandise, or maybe a sandwich sign sitting out. So, you know, the idea that we would have a planter, unless there's a legal hurdle that somebody else can enlighten me on, I don't have a concern from a practical or a safety standpoint about having some of the planters out here. I think it's typical, and frankly, importantly, the sidewalk is wide enough to accommodate that, plus have a safe traveling path for those both able-bodied as well as folks with disabilities. So it's got more than enough space for a wheelchair.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
All right, Mark, you got any other questions from members of the board? Okay, so here's where we are. My concern is that it's 10:22. We want to finish by 11. We have a period of board discussion, which we tend not to be quick. I'm going to be honest with you. And even if we could be somewhat disciplined here, I do have a concern, and I want to kind of poll the board here. Bob got stormwater information relatively recently, And the applicant's engineer himself even said, I know you haven't had a chance to look at it. And I'd like to know, do folks need to have Bob take a look at this before we move forward is my question. I mean, like Karen, yeah, you got a hand up, Karen, go ahead.
Well, I certainly feel that would be appropriate. I was also going to ask regarding the boring question and the streetscape question. I feel that we've had, although we've had some suggestion of what might be included and I don't think we clearly know exactly what the ramifications are. We don't know what time that moratorium might start. Do we have an opportunity to receive testimony from somebody on that, and also on whether we can provide an exception to the ordinance that would be the alternate means and methods of achieving the pipe work underneath the streetscape?
I think we can definitely get from the borough, we can request from the borough documentation of the grant. That is something that is certainly at the end of the day, the way, and we can certainly look at the ordinance about boring under Main Street. We can certainly get that and circulate it to the board. The concern about, but the concern about, at the end of the day, a permit to bore under Main Street is a borough matter and not a planning board matter to give that permission to do that. So at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to, we have a limit as to how far we can, we have a jurisdictional limit, right? But I think
would we need to have that in the record to be able to provide that as a requirement for what was suggested was that we could accept the application with that caveat, but do we have to have those things put into the record in order to do that? That's what I was wondering.
I hear what you're saying, and Karen, maybe I'm going to look to you for help here, but I would think that if we are going to put a condition on a potential condition on a possible approval that references the Main Street streetscape grant and borough ordinances, at some level, we need to put those things into the record, right, Kara? You're muted.
Just so I understand the question. So if we're going to put conditions on that are relative to the streetscape program and the ordinance, you're saying we have to introduce those documents into the record?
Or at least to help us decide what the condition might be, we may need to see the actual terms of what I'm hearing is
get testimony from a representative of the
somebody.
borough.
Right, some testimony on the record of what actually, like Mike made a characterization and we swore him in, and we have that on the record, but he was speaking, with expert knowledge, but we don't actually have the document itself that lays out the condition.
And here is my thought from a condition standpoint. If I'm going to recommend to the board, my condition would be that the applicant do whatever is necessary to not cause any financial or other detriment to the borough in connection with the streetscape program, and get any approvals from the borough with regard to boring, and also with regard to Bob's review of the stormwater calculations, that the applicant comply with any and all comments that Bob has as a result of that review. Now, if where that places the applicant is kind of subject to a situation that they don't know what is required, and then they would have to come back and review that with the board and presumably get condition relief or amended application or whatever the case may be. So I think the board needs to understand, or the board needs to decide what it needs to review in order to make a proper determination. If that is Bob's comments, if that is the documentation regarding the streetscape, regarding the boring ordinance, then if the board needs that to make a determination, then certainly, as we know, the board's entitled to get whatever information it needs to make its decision.
The reason why I'm asking both of those questions right now is I understand from Mr. Roth last week that he wanted to wrap this up before the end of the year, but there are these couple of open questions that I'm hearing in the questions that everyone on the board is asking. And the discussion that we're
Hold on,
having.
Jeff,
Yeah.
it has to wrap up by the end of the year or we have to start over.
Well,
It
that's what I was
doesn't.
asking. That's what I was asking Kara.
Yeah, it actually doesn't. The way that the statute is written, as long, and it specifically says it, so I know that we can rely on it without issue. It says that as long as any member of the board that is not present during a hearing or was not on the entity, on the board during that time, reviews the transcripts, then they can vote on the hearing. So if the makeup of this board changes after January 1, as long as everyone that is on that board that is voting has listened to, or in this case, reviewed the video, which is exactly like being there at the meeting, they can vote on the application.
So that's very different than any practice that we've had for the past 2 decades. I'm just saying.
Which is why I'm
Maybe
asking
some
the
of these
lawyer.
changes.
Which is why I'm asking the lawyer the
It's
question.
great. I love it. That would have saved us so
if-
much time in years past. I can think of 10 applications that we wouldn't have had to like have special meetings and everything else, but that's great.
Yeah,
Not
if you
to
guys don't,
mention-
if you don't mind me putting my video on dark, I'll get the exact statutory reference. and-
Yeah, because if that's the case, then it may help, or we made it a special meeting between the end, now and the end of the year.
Susan, were you gonna say something?
I just said, not to mention, in years past, we didn't have YouTube to be able to watch it
Yeah.
basically in real time, which is wonderful. I mean, I am dating myself, but I can remember
Yeah.
listening on CD in my car to meetings that in order to be able, in order to be able to, and all you heard was paper rustling and no, so this is so much better. I just feel like the whole board can relate. Can I chime in here, Jeff, while I have the floor for a second?
For just a
As-
brief second until Kara looks up a reference, yes.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll kill some time here. If we had to vote tonight, I'd be ready to vote tonight. I kind of know where I'm going with this personally, but I think that the fact that both of these issues, the stormwater issue and the grant issue, have been hanging, this application, I think, has been on our desk since January, was I think the first time we saw actually version A, and then there was B, and then there was C. As far as the elevations go. So I think, because this has been hanging this whole time, I really would like to get the council's attorney's input on the grant issue and Bob's kind of last, hey, this is really how the stormwater, I recommend the stormwater should be addressed issue. Those two major issues, like I said, I'm willing to vote with lots of requirements, but I think we would do the applicant better service as opposed to trying to get the verbiage in, a short amount of time, really late at night, correct. I think it's better to get all that information and do a clean resolution. So as much as I'm willing to vote tonight, I really am. I'm ready. We can put all these caveats into the resolution, but I think it would be safer to get the borough's input first.
Okay, Kara, you got what you need?
Yep, I do. So it's NJSA 40:55D-10.2, entitled Vote by Member Who Was Absent from Hearing, Conditions. A member of a municipal agency who was absent for one or more of the meetings at which a hearing was held or was not a member of the municipal agency at that time shall be eligible to vote on the matter upon which the hearing was conducted, notwithstanding his absence for one or more of the meetings, provided that the board member has available to him the transcript or recording from which he was absent or was not a member, and certifies in writing to the board that he has read such transcript or listened to such recording. So that's the verbatim language of the statute.
Nice.
I don't see any reason why we can't continue this. Again, I don't know if there's going to be any change, but if there is, I'm comfortable that that protects the board.
And Jeff, how much change would we actually be seeing in January? Would we have a quorum anyway, notwithstanding Kara's suggestion that whoever came in could vote on it as well anyway.
So
You see what I
let
mean,
me,
in terms of transferring it over to the next
so
year if
let me,
necessary.
let me be clear, right? The mayor, the class 1 member of the board is the mayor or the mayor's designee. Obviously, Mayor Driver's term is not up and it has heard and would stay on. The class 2 member, municipal employee, is reappointed each year by the borough. So that could change. I'm not asking, I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm just saying that could change technically. The class 3 member is the member from the governing body. That could change year to year. The class 4 members who are, I believe Mark is the only person whose term is expiring this year of our class 4 members. And then our alternates, I believe we have 2 of our alternates whose terms are up, or alternates on 1-year terms or something like
I
that.
think only Hannah's up, I think.
Remember, just Hannah's up, like, so to answer Karen's question, there are adequate number of folks, even if all of those people were to change and none of them were to review the video, which is a confluence of events that is unlikely to happen, I still think we would have a board constituted who would be returning, who's heard all of this already. That would give us quorum.
The odds are good that
Odds
we'll
are-
have,
I
but
don't
not
guarantee-
guaranteed.
I don't guarantee anything because Brian wants Epsilon, but absent that kind of stuff,
Bad.
yeah. I think we're okay in that sense. Jim, you got a hand up.
I was going to say, I'll come out of the weeds to say that I agree that I don't mind holding, even though you may have the opinions as to what you want to vote. I do think that the outstanding items are important both to the applicant and to the board. Because
And to the borough.
And to the borough.
Okay. So this is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm hearing then, is that we've got some outstanding issues. I am actually inclined, I think, Susan, you put it pretty well, that we could negotiate complicated language of conditions, or we could carry it, get these answers done, and then have a much cleaner set of clarity for what we're doing here. So I'm okay with that. And if Carrie, you're saying we're allowed to do that, I'm just making very clear, I'm asking, making sure, because Todd's recollection is mine.
And also, Jeff, although Susan said she was ready to vote without those extra things that we've mentioned, other members of the board may not be. I know I'm not completely comfortable without those things. So I would appreciate to be able to review those things more clearly, to know where we're going with the streetscape, and to know where we're going with that grant and what effect we might have. So
does that mean we have to take testimony again, since we've already had a closing argument?
I don't think it's testimony. We are asking for clarification of items that have already been testified to. We are getting Bob is going to review and provide us with his expert opinion of stuff that's already been submitted by the applicant, and the just getting clarification about the grant conditions. Again, we're just literally getting copies of things from the borough. I don't think that that's new testimony, but Carrie, if you think we need to reopen, we'll leave that to you.
We certainly can. There's no problem with reopening to provide some clarification or address any questions or get the applicant's consent to certain things. That's not a problem. Again, I think it does help to make a condition that could be amenable to that could be reviewed and more amenable across the board than just trying to haphazardly put something together that we're not sure is going to make sense based upon the actual documentation.
Look, in the end, we want to help this applicant move forward. So in the end, they want clarity. They want to know whether they can move forward with their project or not. And, we want to help them get there. That's the goal of this whole thing. So, in the end, I rather see it very clear.
And we
so
want
that they know
accuracy,
what
too.
their clear path is.
We want accuracy, so we're not in a situation where we have to come back and change something.
Okay, so what we're going to do then, we're all saying the same thing. We're going to move forward. What we are going to do, and I'm glad to see that the applicant's still hanging out there in the attendee panel. We are going to carry this to our, now Kara, we're allowed to conduct business at our reorg meeting, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so we will be carrying this application. Sorry, we will carry the public hearing for 91 Main Street, Block 21, Lot 25. We are carrying it to our January 11th, 2022 meeting, 7 p.m. virtual platform. Continuing, no further notice will be required. So that's what we're going to do. Jeremy, I am looking at our council liaison. I need for the board to get the grant. Mayor, you have it faster, whoever, one of you. We need to get to Eileen to circulate to the board and to our professionals the grant and terms. We need that. And we need, just point us to the direction, chapter and verse of the ordinance dealing with boring under Main Street, right? That it's in the ordinance. I just don't know what it is. If you can just point to that to us and we can copy it out and give it to everybody. And then Bob's going to need to issue a letter once he has a chance to review the information that's been provided by the applicant.
Jeff, just a quick question to Kara. I don't think we actually ever closed the public hearing, so I don't think we have to reopen it, do we?
Well, we didn't take a vote to close the public hearing, but we essentially did that. But it's okay. So we're just carrying it anyway. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So it's
And
not gonna
Jeff,
matter.
so I'll just jump in here that I'll send to you and Eileen copy of the ordinance I pulled right up with the search of boring that prohibits under sidewalk and under street.
Yep, just a little chunk so we know what it is with the reference and everyone can take a look at it. That's great. I mean, for those who don't know, the borough's ordinance is all digital. You can always go find it yourself, but I want to have it so we have it, on the record for reference. Okay, good. Thank you. All right, that is
The only last question I have is, Eileen, when do we have an extension through?
I think the latest extension might have been until tonight. We should probably ask the applicant to extend that until into January.
Correct.
okay. I just asked Mr. Roth to get permission to speak here. Kara, got to ask what you need to ask.
Yes, Lee, you've heard the board's discussion, what it is that we'd like to get some clarity on and the assistance that it would give the board in coming to a recommendation on some conditions. We do need the extension of the applicant to render a decision. I think if we have it through, if you want to take it just through January 11th, that's fine. If you give it to us through the end of January, that's fine as well, but I'll leave that up to you.
I will grant the extension through 11. I'd appreciate receiving copies of what you're all getting so I can have read it as well to see what the impact might be on us.
Most certainly.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So that's item 9 on the agenda. Item 10, chair items. Reminder, everyone, tomorrow evening, we have our joint Planning Board Borough Council session at 7. You should have all gotten, or will get, or should get a panelist invite link from Sally to participate in that. Mayor will be chairing that meeting since it's a joint meeting and Mayor outranks everybody. So the mayor will be chairing that session. Our next meeting, as you just heard, is on January 11th. For those who've never been, so we have some newer members who've never been to a reorg meeting. Essentially, our reorg meeting is we swear in folks who are being appointed or reappointed to the board. We have a number of kind of housekeeping resolutions, dates of meetings, publication of notice, appointment of professionals, and election of chair and vice chair of the board. And then once that business is conducted, we'll then go right into, it'll be a regular meeting with public comment, obviously, because we have that by law. And then we'll go right into the continuation and conclusion of 91 Main Street, hopefully at the meeting. And other than that, Eileen, is there anything else that you know of coming down the road?
No, not that I'm aware of.
All right, I am hopeful that at their December 22nd, I think, meeting, the county commissioners will vote favorably on our application for the economic development grant so that we could get moving on the master plan stuff. Beth's got a timeline already for 22. We're going to hit the ground going. I know we've promised this 16 times before, but it's going to happen. We'll also we'll coordinate with council to make sure that once that approval happens, we've got the budget authorization resolution to go through council for the rest of the money for that. And I'll make sure that that happens. That's what I've got there. Eileen, were there any bills this week? I didn't see anything. Was there?
No, there were no new bills. We did receive some escrow checks. Everything is in a positive balance right now.
Excellent. Any professional reports? No. Good. Do we need to go into executive session?
Do not.
All right,
Not anything I know about.
All right, before we take a motion to adjourn, again, if you haven't already done so, please RSVP to the dinner on January 4th. I would look forward to seeing all of you there who are able to come. And I will, like I said, it's cash bar. I'm buying at least one drink. Beyond that,
Just yourself?
no, I'll buy all you a drink. I can.
Oh, all right.
Listen,
Top shelf.
no, I didn't say that. It's Chimney Rock. The top shelf ain't that high. It's okay. So, yeah, please RSVP to that. I don't think there's any other items. I think we're good. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Budney moved, Engelhardt second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. I will see folks tomorrow, if not on the dinner at the 4th and the meeting on the 11th. Have a happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
All right.
Happy New Year.
Merry
Christmas.
Happy holidays.